right, can I call the meeting to order? If we could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could ask everyone to remain standing for a moment of silence. Retired Assistant Fire Chief Chris Tracy passed away yesterday. He was a driving force behind the regional fire school. Excuse me if I get a little emotional because I knew Chris a really long time, and he was a hell of a guy and a decent and good man. And if we could just have a moment of silence in his memory. Thank you. I thank for those who are here today and online, and I do want to thank a lot of our residents who came out last week for the town hall meeting with FEMA representatives, which I think was really helpful to have them be able to come. And I also want to thank all the residents. We sent out a Penfield Pavilion update last week for residents based on a lot of the information we received during the meeting and trying to just get it, a complicated issue, a little bit more easy to understand. So I want to thank all the residents who did submit emails over the past week or so. And for the record, I just want to say we have with us attorney, our bond counsel, Attorney John Stastrom, our Chief Administrative Officer Tom Bremer, our CFO Jared Smith, and our Town Attorney is on the line on WebEx, and our Interim DPW Director John Marsilio, and our Parks Director Anthony Calabrese. And so before I begin, I thought it might, well, we don't have that many. I was walking here at like 100 people. That's a good thing. So we have, there was a little confusion about how to word this on Friday, the resolution itself, because we do have these bonds that we have put aside over the last couple of years in two separate accounts to help with paying, because we obviously knew we have tremendous contamination costs associated with the fill pile. And also, well, we didn't necessarily know. We knew we had a appeal in the works with FEMA on the NOV, but we hadn't. That didn't come out until after. So what I'm going to do first, for those who may not have saw the meeting or any residents who might be signed on, we do have a PowerPoint presentation.
I don't have the new resolution. I understand a new draft was sent, and I don't have it.
If you can have mine. It's something we're going to ask to amend. That was on the advice of bond counsel, but I wanted to do this PowerPoint first. I think Jen sent you an email.
At 3:40.
That's when we got it.
I also got notice that some people went to Sullivan Hall, so I don't know what that, I guess it was listed at some place, that the meeting was at Sullivan. I don't know what we do with that information, but.
I'm not aware that it was listed. Was it listed anywhere else but here?
On the town calendar, it says Sullivan Hall.
It does? But in the agenda that went out?
I don't know if there's a way, if someone's at town hall, that they can.
You want to let Jennifer know to put a sign on the door? Thank you. Yeah, we moved to here, and in the agenda we moved to here. Just want to accommodate the ability for people to have more room. Okay, so our PowerPoint presentation. Jack, do you want to?
Madam First Selectwoman, do we need to put the item before us first?
No, I think we can do the PowerPoint first, and then because we have some issues with the, possibly amending the resolution.
Right,
So
but we
I-
don't need to put the amended resolution before us. We would put the resolution before us and then vote to amend it if we wanted, right? I just want to make sure we do it right. That's
Right, I think I can do a PowerPoint before we do anything.
Okay.
Okay, so here is something I shared during the town hall meeting, which I think is helpful because because we knew a lot of our newer residents might not necessarily know sort of the history of the pavilion. So if you just see here, it's very important for people to kind of understand where we came from. I want to note that the pavilion's notice of violation on the grade beams was complicated by the fact that there was Julian fill placed beneath the building, and the town has been simultaneously working with the state and federal regulating agencies on both these items. Removing the soil without simultaneously addressing the grade beams would have been a huge added cost, which is why the proposal is to do everything together. We also had to negotiate with FEMA to treat the building as two separate entities, the locker rooms and the main building. And just to kind of give some, I know there's been some, comments regarding why is the town waited so long and all of that. There were 2 appeals filed by the town. When I came into office in November 25th of 2019, there was currently a second appeal waiting or had been filed and awaiting for action by FEMA. And even just a few days after I took office, I walked into certified letters from the Department of Environmental Protection that were dated in October that weren't opened. So we had to run up to make a meeting with DEEP to find out what was going on and try to jump onto that. And then, as we all know, 4 months later, COVID hit. So we have been working to build relationships with these regulatory agencies over the last 2 years and always in constant contact, even throughout COVID and during the significant turnover that those agencies faced, especially DEEP. You want to go to the next one? Okay, so here you can see, why are we here? Contaminated Julian fill from the fill pile was illegally deposited beneath Penfield Pavilion during construction. The town is required to remove it pursuant to state and federal laws. FEMA has determined the town installed horizontal grade beams at a height that is in violation with the federal floodplain management regulations. Under federal law, the town is required to bring Penfield Pavilion into compliance. And as a result, the town has received notices of violation from federal and state agencies that must be addressed. Where are we? If the town does not approve a plan for corrective action by the end of March regarding the notices of violation at Penfield Pavilion, we face a myriad of negative consequences that will impact residents in our town. What must the town do? Adopt a plan to address the grade beam violations, the NOV from FEMA regarding Penfield Pavilion, and the consent order from the Connecticut Department of Environmental and Energy Protection Agency for the contaminated soil beneath the building. So the FEMA NOV is to fix the main structure, excluding the locker room portion, to bring it into compliance by lowering the elevation of the grade beams. The alternative is to comply is knock down the main building structure, removing all the grade beams with it. The EPA and the DEP, obviously, that fill is, we do have a remediation action plan that was submitted to DEEP and the EPA. So people say, what happens if we don't comply? If the town does not approve corrective action by March 31st, FEMA will begin the process of downgrading the town's flood zone classification. A downgrade will result in residents in the flood zone losing 10% discount on flood insurance and ultimately, the flood insurance would not be available for the community. So this is sort of complicated to a lot of people. The town is a member of FEMA's Community Rating System, CRS, which awards communities that go above and beyond the minimum standards of the National Flood Insurance Program. As a Class 8 CRS community, all flood insurance policyholders, including policies for town-owned buildings in the special flood hazard area, receive a 10% discount. FEMA has identified the elevation of the grade beams below Penfield Pavilion to be a violation of the NFIP after as I said earlier, the 2 appeals by the town were filed. They consider the determination to be final and that is not subject to mediation, arbitration, or any further appeal. The violation jeopardizes our ability to remain in the CRS program. FEMA has initiated steps to downgrade the town's CRS status, the result which would eliminate the 10% insurance discount, and to date, what FEMA describes as a point of no return for the downgrade. It is not final and could be as early as March 31st, meaning if the town has not demonstrated significant, meaningful progress toward remediating the violation, then notification to the insurance companies would ensue, and a downgrade would ultimately take place for the new flood insurance policies written or existing policies renewed after October 1st. Should the town not address the violation, the next steps for FEMA would be probation and for all flood insurance policyholders in addition to losing the 10% discount. So as was stated at the meeting and has stated with us as well during our meetings, if FEMA sees the town taking real action, and what they mean by that is town bodies are appropriating funds to address the notice of violation. To them, that rises to the town is taking it seriously and is trying to do something to rectify it. So that's kind of what they mean by that. And I have been in constant contact with Congressman Himes' office, who would work with us if we could get this through the town bodies, put together a letter, and they would attach, he would, with the congressional delegation, or United States senators, attach a letter to our letter asking for a reconsideration of the downgrade. So they would give us some time, knowing that we are working toward the end or toward the remediating the notice of violation. Next slide. So as I shared with our residents at the town hall meeting, the option 1, which I believe is, to me, the most common sense option, is to remove the Julian fill pile soil from beneath the building, which is estimated to cost about $5 million. And then the construction requirements that are required to get under that building and remove is demoing and reinstalling building and skirting, reinstalling the decks and ramps, temporary supporting of the roof decks, temporary support of the building, dewatering, and then the permanent structure support. And then to be in actual compliance with the NOV on the gray beams is an estimated cost of $3 million. Option 2. So demolish the building foundations. That would bring us into compliance with FEMA because there would no longer be a building there, and then there would no longer be gray beams. And so that estimated cost is about $2 million. And then to be in compliance, obviously, with the Julian fill, it's about $1 million less than if the building is actually in place. And then, as I've said at the town hall meeting, I've grown up in town and I've served in various offices in public service to our community. Our community has a lot of ideas and opinions. And so I can imagine soon after, if we did demolish the building, start to hear, well, can we just have a small concession stand? And, you know, I really like to have a little covered deck, or can we have some more bathrooms? And that's the kind of stuff that I think happened over a long period of time in our community, where there was extraordinary amounts of conversation about this facility. And I mean hundreds of hours of meetings, many of which I attended as a state representative. So I know that there will be something that people will want to replace kind of what we already have. So how will we pay for it? So as I mentioned earlier, over the past 2 years, the town has worked with the boards to set aside surplus funds that is approximately $15 million we have right now, which is still available and could be used to fund costs related to both the remediation efforts and the Penfield Pavilion repair. In addition, the town reserved during the ARPA, when we got the ARPA funds, we set aside $1 million toward fill pile-related costs because we knew we had this. And so there is also the option of bonding for the construction portion of it, which would be approximately $3 million for the NOV on the building. So is there an option to recoup funds spent in the past? You know, a lot of people have asked us, can we get that $4 million that we appealed for? And we have been told in no uncertain terms those funds are not available. Those were Super Sandy funds that were available to be applied for during that period of time. We did apply, we filed 2 appeals, and we were denied. So those funds are not available to us to be able to utilize. So the benefits of Penfield Pavilion. So a lot of people say, well, why do we need the pavilion, and what's the point of the pavilion? So we did this at the town hall meeting, and I thought it'd be important to share this again. There are approximately 150 events per year that are held at the pavilion. 80% of our residents are the people who are renting this pavilion out for family events, funerals, weddings, fundraisers, bar mitzvahs, retirements, and alike. In addition to that, the Park and Recreation Department utilizes the building for a lot of community events. Father-daughter dances, comedy nights, lots of things that our community gathers together to utilize. And it is really the only large facility we have in the town to use for all kinds of things. We also use it for promotional ceremonies for town employees, police department, and et cetera. It also is utilized, you know, I got a lot of emails from people since this started, and, you know, people talk about how much they really enjoy the pavilion, how they like sitting under the covered deck and having lunch or having a cup of tea or reading a book. And I have to say, I heard from quite a few of our senior citizens in town who really like sitting under that pavilion. Maybe they have difficulty walking on the beach, or they just want to sit in a covered area and enjoy Long Island Sound. And it also, I just want to mention that the pavilion was appraised by an independent appraisal company in November of 2021, and an estimated cost of $7.4 million. So I know people have asked, well, how much money we're really making off of it. We reached out and asked Galen in our Park and Rec department. We charge $3,500 during peak season for our residents and $1,000 more for non-residents. And the last time we raised those prices was in 2018. Certainly, if the Park and Recreation Commission decided that they wanted to raise those rates, they could do that. And frankly, I think it's actually pretty affordable, considering how nice that facility is. And again, you know, I know that people talk about how much income is it really generating, but at the end of the day, we aren't a private business. We are a local government, and any money that we bring in goes toward the town funds to help fund other services in town. But that is not the goal of a government. A government is not in the business of making money. It is providing services to its residents and amenities for the lowest possible cost. So are we doing anything to increase resiliency efforts? Yes, resiliency at the pavilion site is a separate issue from the NOV. The town is committed to funding and hiring a coastal engineering firm to update previous resiliency studies. And once those preliminary designs have been established, the town will review the designs with DEEP, EPA, and FEMA. Any acceptable designs will then be discussed with our community. What about the elevation? To resolve the NOV, the natural grade must be restored to an elevation of 8 feet per the National Flood Insurance Guidelines. DEEP and FEMA have jurisdiction over the elevation of the beach. Well, we can discuss that more as we open it up to the public for questions. So can the federal delegation help us? As I mentioned earlier, on February 10th, FEMA notified the town for the first time during a phone call while we were trying to set up the town hall meeting and the requirements they wanted to have for the meeting, where we heard for the first time that there was an insurance downgrade process looming. The town had been working with FEMA since July of 2021, and at no time until February 10th was the town alerted to this deadline date of this compliance of the NOV. As you can imagine, I was pretty shocked to hear it. As soon as the phone call was completed, I went right into my office and I called Congressman Himes on his cell phone and explained to him that, Houston, we have a problem. Because I knew that, we have to go through all of these town hall meetings and stuff, and I knew that this obviously was going to be a difficult task. So we worked and we both agreed that the only path forward would prevent FEMA from taking action were for our town bodies to take action this month. And so we started to scramble to make sure that we could have meetings, that everyone could at least have an opportunity, our town funding bodies, which is the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM. And we discussed a coordinated approach with the rest of the federal delegation and the state delegation to ask FEMA for an extension on the insurance classification downgrade. So today's vote, next steps. If the repair and remediation of the pavilion passes the Board of Selectmen today, the Board of Finance will take this item up on a special meeting on March 13th, and the RTM will take it up subsequently after that. And then public input will be part of each of those meetings. I just want to thank our residents who have written to us over the last few weeks with feedback and questions and words of support. And I asked Jackie to do sort of a count of them. And based on our last count, we had 56 residents who wrote in favor of keeping and repairing the pavilion. We had 23 who wrote in favor of knocking it down. There were 32 additional emails that I would classify as sort of neutral. They asked either a question or thanked me for my communication on this issue. And so now I will open it up. And I just want to get back to my agenda. Excuse me, I have a lot of papers. So the agenda item, and as I explained earlier, this is kind of a unique situation because we do have these funds that we put aside for all of this stuff. So we were trying to figure this out and, on Friday, and we were having some difficulty getting in touch with bond counsel in the afternoon, because my belief and what our finance department believed was if you had funds in these accounts, they would only be really transferable, as we have in the past, from surplus by the Board of Finance. And I didn't think that that would be a good idea, not to have some vote go through each of the town bodies, because I know people want to have a vested interest and have an opportunity to vote. So at the end of the day, we put up the $3 million just on the Penfield piece to go through the town bodies, not really realizing or understanding if that other parts, the money moving out of the other funds, could be essentially voted on by the other town bodies. So today, we had our finance department, our CFO had a conversation with our bond counsel, and I gave you my whereas.
I need this. Oh, no. Is that extra?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So it was determined, and I know our bond counsel is here, and we can talk a little bit more about it, but I was going to ask we would need a motion and a second from the board, but then I would ask for an amendment to amend the original resolution that basically would ask for all of the costs to be pulled from those two accounts that we currently have. And I could read it once it's time to read it, but I am going to open it up now. I'm going to ask for a motion on the item that we actually have on our agenda to hear and consider and adopt a bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Appropriating $3 Million for the Penfield Pavilion Foundation and Construction Project and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation."
So moved.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we're going to open it up now, and I just want to read this amendment so that we can all hear it and the public can hear it as well. So this amendment to it, the resolution that we think may be more appropriate, is a resolution appropriating $10.5 million for the costs related to the construction, remediation, and addressing the notice of violation at Penfield Pavilion. Whereas contaminated fill from the Julian Pile was illegally deposited beneath the Penfield Pavilion during construction. Whereas by state and federal law, the town of Fairfield, the town is required to remove the fill in accordance with deep EPA standards under a consent order. Whereas FEMA has determined the town installed horizontal grade beams at a height that is in violation with the federal plane management regulations. Whereas under federal law, the town is required to bring Penfield Pavilion into compliance with FEMA regulations. Whereas the town has received notices of violations from federal and state agencies that must be addressed. Whereas if the town does not take corrective action by the end of March regarding the notice of violation, the town faces a myriad of negative consequences that will impact residents and the town. Whereas Penfield Pavilion is an asset to the community enjoyed by residents year-round, cleaning the contaminated fill and lowering the grade beams is necessary to comply with all state and federal laws. Whereas the town costs for the remediation and construction at Penfield Pavilion, as well as the cost to address the notice of violation, is $11.5 million. The total costs. And whereas the town previously allocated and approved $1 million in American Rescue Fund plan funding to be applied toward the total costs, and whereas the town is holding the funds in the capital non-reoccurring fill pile remediation account, and desires to appropriate $10.5 million of those funds to finance the balance of the total costs. And now, therefore, be it resolved as recommended by the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, and the town hereby appropriates the following sums from the capital non-reoccurring fill pile remediation account for the following purposes: $4 million related to the remediation at Penfield, that's the soil; $3.5 million related to the construction at Penfield Pavilion; $3 million related to the work to address the notices of violation. And that is the amendment. Can't hear you, Tom.
Are you asking to move the amendment at this time? The amendment is only part of that, right? I mean, that's the entire whereas.
No, that's yes, that's the amendment to the main item that was posted on the agenda.
Right. That's how it would read. It's not just the amended amount. That's the full how it would read.
Correct.
Are you asking that we vote on that now?
We'll vote to bring it up for discussion. A motion.
I'll move the amendment.
I'm going to second it, but I got to say, my head is exploding.
You're welcome to my world.
I was handed this piece of paper 10 minutes ago. It came by email at 3:30, and so I didn't have a chance to read it. I don't want to be obstructionist. I want to ask really good questions today. I want to raise my own concerns. We may walk away where I am in a minority position. I don't know. I have no idea. Mr. Flynn and I have not discussed this at all. But I got to be honest, it's almost unfair, and, you know, fair is not the right word because we do lots of things that aren't always fair. It doesn't seem fair, though, to the residents that we're having to address this in this way. I I've moved it, I've seconded it, because I do think the discussion is so important. But I have so many more questions than I think I do convictions. So I am here with an open mind, but with great, great, great concerns. And so I just want to say that for the record. And for the record, I just heard that out loud for the first time. So I don't even know where to start. So I'll just say that, and then.
Well, me
it's your
too.
meeting.
And, listen, I share in the frustration. I have felt it literally every single day since I got elected. The amount of unbelievable things that happened that I've had to address weren't things I would have chose either. I did not expect to hear from FEMA on February 10th telling me that they were imposing a new deadline. We were working toward the goal of negotiating with FEMA in earnest and in good faith. We had submitted a plan that we thought, after many discussions back and forth, which take time with regulating agencies. They don't always get back to you. It could take months, and then you go back and forth and back and forth. They didn't even sign off on our full plan remediation to the NOV until January. So, my head's spinning too. It's spinning that we have the worst contamination scandal in the town's history, the most complicated criminal investigation, per the judge, in the state of Connecticut's history. I mean, I don't like it either, but we have a building that we are being told after 2 appeals is in violation, and we have to act. I mean, I don't like it either, and this was a little complicated, as I mentioned earlier, because we have these funds that we were all responsible enough to put away to make sure we had funding available to deal with a lot of stuff. This thing, I mean, frankly, it should have never happened, but it's here. And as the leader of the town, I'm kind of in a tough position myself, because FEMA's saying that they're going to do all these things if we don't comply with this. So I apologize that, I just got this too. We had to work with bond counsel. We're trying to figure out how to use funds that we already put away in a way that is legal with our funding and requirements and all of that. And also, it was very important to me that I wanted our boards to be able to have an opportunity to vote on these items. So originally it was the 3 million, and then the other, we were going to ask the Board of Finance, as they normally do, transfer funds. But then we were told that this actually could go through all 3 bodies. So that's why we scrambled to put this resolution together with the advice of bond counsel. And so here we are.
Can I respond to a few things?
Absolutely.
A few things for the record and a few just responses to what you've just said. And listen, 2 things I want to say first and foremost. I'm not going to deny that it's terrible that we're here. I'm not excusing the past behaviors of decisions made by a former administration. And one concern I have is exactly the things that we are critical of and frustrated and angry at the decisions that were made because things were rushed through in the year before an election. I would hate us to make the same mistake twice or 3 times, because we're here, and I think we do have opportunities to slow this process down. I want to say that I think the count of emails, not to discount every email, but it's not necessarily an accurate depiction of where people are or where we are as a collective community. I know that Parks and Rec sent out an email advocating for the building. Whether or not people argue that that was a good thing to do or not a good thing to do, it went out to a constituency of people with a specific POV. It went out through the Republican Town Committee, got an email advocating to, save Penfield. And I hope we can put those things aside, because to me, this is not politics. This is really about not only a business decision, there's an emotional component. There's lots of things. There's an environmental decision that needs to come in play. And I want to underscore that, because even many Democrats I've spoken to are conflicted. So if we sort of say, these people think this and these people, I feel like we're all going to walk away and not everybody's going to be happy. And probably 50% of the people are going to be happy and 50% of the people are not going to be happy. So what I see our role is here today, as I said from the beginning, is to ask good questions, to make sure that we're all making the most informed decisions that we can make and think through all of these scenarios. And so to that end, a few things to respond to from your presentation. I don't see these issues as separate, that the flooding, the resiliency plan, we've got to factor those things in because I think that it's going to change the cost differentials in the various situations outlined or the options outlined. You know, when you said, Houston, we have a problem back in February, just last month, I mean, Houston, the problem's been here since 2018. You know, we've known this is coming. One of the first parting gifts that the former first selectman gave to me was, oh, and by the way, here's this notice. So I knew that this is something we've been dealing with. The two appeals that failed, I hate to instill a deep sense of dread, a point of no return. I've spent a lot of time talking to state representation, FEMA representation, listening to the hearing, re-listening to the hearing. I'm not denying that there are going to be about 1,700 residents that if we go into retrograde, that they will then suffer from a 10%, losing that 10% discount, in some cases 5% discount, which really amounts to $250,000 for a year. Again, not diminishing that. But perhaps there are ways with ARPA funding we could offset that to buy ourselves some time, because my understanding is that communities go in and out of retrograde often as a mechanism for those communities to remediate some of the issues. The issue of FEMA versus DEEP versus the notice of violations, there's a lot of conflating of those issues, and it's very confusing. So I appreciate perhaps, and I don't assign intent, but perhaps to simplify it for people, they've kind of been glommed on to the fill. I think we have to be very careful. Again, the terrible fill situation highlighted that there's also historical contaminants. But by the way, if a building goes away, then we don't have the same FEMA issue because it's not in their jurisdiction. So we're not being forced to fix the violation with this proposal. Because other things, it's, again, DEEP has different constraints from FEMA. Again, very complicated, but I think there are options. We're not backed into a corner. And to me, the hope would be to walk away with a better understanding of what those options are, to pass those on to the other boards, because I do think we have an opportunity to slow down. And if I'm sure there are going to be questions about retrograde, so I'd love to turn back to that. You made the assertion that we have funds. We have surplus money. By the last count, we have anywhere between $12 and $17 million remaining that don't include the WPCA remediation issues that we still face. $15 million in estimated costs for issues that we have to clean up, soil-related, fill-related issues. So if we spend money, we still have to find more money. So yes, we have it, but we still have lots to spend it on. So, you know, again, just some observations. Even some of the way that this resolution is written, including some of the fill pile and illegal dumping, and it's conflating issues in a way that's concerning. There's some hyperbole that's concerning. And then even the sources of funding that you alluded to with the CFO and bond counsel is concerning. So I'm throwing a lot back at you because there was a lot of input, but I hope that we can address those issues before we even move to a vote. So I'm prepared to stay here as long as we have to.
So I just want to, I mean, there's a lot there, but just to be clear, in 2018, there was an appeal filed, and then in 2019, there was an appeal filed. So when there's an act of appeal filed with the federal regulating agency, yes, you know there's an NOV, but there's an appeal filed. Now, when I came in, no one said to me, oh, by the way, that appeal's gonna fail because of all this stuff, because no one gave me any information about any of that. And I was managing the fill pile, notices of violation, which were a big deal. So when they finally denied that appeal is when we started engaging with them and looking into the matter more closely, and then starting to uncover documents and letters, more specifically the letter that was sent to the administration saying the original, the plan that we signed off on, FEMA, you have changed and are building it outside of the guidelines that we agreed on, and that you shouldn't be doing that. And there was a decision made, as we discussed during the August 31st meeting. Someone made a conscious decision to ignore FEMA and go ahead and build it out of regulation. But that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to note, to clarify, yes, 2018, but that, we still had appeals. The town had an appeal as just as, I believe it was either August or September of 2019, when the other appeal was filed. So it was a long way away at that time of the notice of violation being brought back up. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, a couple things. I guess I'm the only one whose head isn't exploding, right? This thing's been coming at us like a train for a number of years now. Delayed by COVID, delayed by the inability of the state and federal authorities to actually focus on this due to everything else going on globally and nationally. And now it's finally here. And it's a problem. And what I look at is, right now, we have an asset, for better or worse, that's on the books and on our bonding for about $12.3 million, which is the current cost. If you factor in, we spent $5 million up front, and then we unfortunately spent another 7.3 to rebuild this several years later after Sandy, which comes to about 12.3 million. Now, it's also cost us, forget the fill pile thing for a second, it's also cost us $7.3 million because we didn't follow FEMA in the first place. It was, why do I come up with the 7.3? It was 4.3 in the lost refund from FEMA in Sandy that's gone and presumably not available anymore based on best available information. And the revised cost to actually address the beam. So that's 7.3 million that past actions and ignoring of FEMA and relying, by the way, on experts, because I happen to be on the Board of Finance. When we had experts come before us and tell us that with 85 to 90% certainty, this would be reversed on appeal. Now, mind you, the Board of Finance was told after the appeals and after we started asking where the 4.3 million was. But nevertheless, we were told that we would win on these things, and we lost. The only surprise that's been to me, and then we had several presentations, the biggest one being last August, where we were also told this was coming fast before us. The only surprise to me now is this latest information from FEMA that, oh, by the way, we held you up for a long period of time. We were reviewing this for a long period of time. And now we're going to put a marker on it because you haven't moved. And we're going to say that you need to do it by X date, or we're going to impact not just insurance for residents, which is bad enough, but insurance for town buildings that are within the same area, because we lost that, which could be substantial cost to the town. At this point, it's time we stop admiring the problem and we get to solutions. We get to understand, are these costs the real costs? And we get to discuss what it comes down to at this point is, do you want the pavilion right now? And do you want to keep FEMA in check right now? Because we've ignored them once before, twice before. Or do you not want the pavilion? And you want to go back to something very small there. And to Brenda's point, then we're going to start the entire discussion again over what needs to be there. And what do people want when they go to the beach. That's where we are at this point in time. And I'm not trying to say it's at all simple, but we're making it overly complex in terms of what's in front of us. And as far as the erosion issue, that's a huge issue, but it's a much bigger issue than a building of this size. It's an issue that goes the entire coastline. And whether we address it or not, or how it gets addressed, is really going to be a substantial cash outlay for the town over many number of years, because we're going to have to work with, I would assume, DEEP, FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and a whole host of other agencies, I can imagine, relative to Long Island Sound, as to how we're going to deal with an overall flood plan, which really, that's not part of a discussion of a pavilion right now. This is about the pavilion, and about, are we going to invest in an asset that we've already invested in and are still paying for, or are we not? And that's as simple as it is for me right now. And by the way, my head hasn't exploded, but I am very, very sad about this. Very sad about this. This is the third time that this has had to come before the town bodies in the last 14 years or so. And it's unnecessary and it's unwarranted, but it's here, and we've got to stop admiring it, the problem that is, and fix it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, and I guess I would agree in terms of the big picture. My head is not exploding there because we have known this is coming. Where I'm getting confused, not confused, where the explosions are coming in is in the details. Because you asked two really simple questions. Are these the real costs? And do we want the pavilion? And I think where for me, the answer is where the head explosion starts to occur. Because I think that we fundamentally disagree. I think that you cannot consider either of those things. We can't know the real answer to either of those things in terms of real costs without including a flood plan and without understanding, having more information and a resiliency plan. I don't think that we have enough information to including what our other options are and real costs and estimate costs and understanding the source of those things. So from a bigger picture, yeah, I agree. You know, can we afford this? Are these the real costs? And do we want the pavilion? I mean, yes, I want the pavilion, but for me, the question becomes, at what price?
Can I ask a comment on that, or actually comment on something?
Yes.
Nancy, thank you. One thing, and I meant to address this in my little soliloquy there. The amendment just being passed out before the meeting, I think that's a fair comment. But when I read the amendment, really, the only thing that's changed in the amendment is the source of funding of $3 million, which in the original proposal put before us was coming from bonding, increased bonding. And in the new proposal came from existing funds. I won't say excess funds, surplus funds, whatever we want to call it. It comes from existing funds. The reason I'm intrigued by that is because the bond market is the rates have risen so much right now. And if we have cash on hand such as that available to address this now, it could be in our longer term financial interest to actually pay for it out of existing funds as opposed to bonding. But that was truly, if I can help in any way, that was truly the change that I read when I read through the amendment that was put before us. And you're absolutely right, just before this meeting. And I guess, Brenda, you had said that's because you would just learn this from bond counsel today. So fair enough. It's a funding question more than anything else. And I hope that helps.
Thank you. So, did you want, I know you mentioned, Nancy, regarding estimates, cost estimates of alike. Would you like Eli to address some of that?
Yeah, Mike, yeah, sure. I mean, might as well start there.
Okay.
All right, so as Brenda just presented, option one, that's
Sorry,
me.
can you just say for the record who you are?
Oh, Eli Gazal. I am an engineer in the engineering department, and I'm currently also the project manager for this specific project as far as the town side goes. So we put together all these estimates there using outside help and firms. So the first one we have is option one, which is to maintain the building. The best way that we kind of did this was to break it out in what I consider buckets. The first bucket is the Julian fill, and that is prepared by Weston and Sampson and the town. That's on, I'm not sure if you have the colored copy or not.
Do you have extra copies here?
Do we have extra copy? Was this in the backup?
Your backup? I don't have a colored copy, but can your backup?
I know,
Yeah.
I'll just pull it
I
up,
think
but,
that is it.
Yep, that was,
See that Bismarck?
yep. So, sorry, can you just say where you're referencing
yep,
again?
the Weston Sampson Penfield remedial cost. This is the one that equates to 5 million. The green,
See, it says Weston Sampson on top.
Yep.
I don't have color, but.
yeah, there should be two of those. One equates to 5, then the other one equates to 4 million.
Yeah, these are Weston Sampson. That's the soil people.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, so this is the estimate that is, put together by Weston Sampson based on approximately, and he said over 800 samples that have taken on the Penfield Pavilion. So this is the breakout for the $5 million. Construction requirements, this is work that basically needs to be performed prior, while, and after remediation. And that equates to 3.5 million. And that's the orange sheet here by Bismarck. The top of it says construction enabling and restoration.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me, can you just talk more about where these numbers come from and how we arrived at them? How
Yeah,
you
so start remediation, or which one would you like to go
I
through?
mean, I'll hear it all.
All right, perfect. So we'll start with the remediation one. So as I said, there's 800, more than 800 samples taken by Weston Sampson, our licensed environmental agency there. So basically, they came in and they said, okay, took more than 800 samples, and then they put together their plan. And of course, they filed it with DEEP and EPA, and that plan has been approved, or no further questions, as they say. And the plan is basically very simple. It's to remove all contaminated fill. So there is ACM, PCB, and solid waste. That's kind of the three categories that we have on the Penfield Pavilion. And the way that this price is put together is, as you know, the site is complicated due to its logistics. So you can't just remediate and do the FEMA. Both has to be at the same time, right? Because you're digging below the building. So at that time, since you want to fix the foundations, you'd want to remove the soil at the same time. So the biggest three things are the downtime due to logistics of the site. There's going to be a lot of, okay, your turn to dig, your turn to demo, your turn to build, okay, your turn to dig. So it's a lot of going back and forth. Sampling is a big cost, just due to after we remediate, sampling needs to happen to make sure that we have captured all the actual Julian fill. And then the third and kind of the biggest one is transport and disposal. So just so a little bit of background information, right now we are currently anticipating the ACM soil going to Ohio. So there's some significant transport costs there. You have the PCBs going to Michigan, and then the solid waste is going to local facilities. And the local facilities are, after COVID, are finding it very difficult to stay open just because costs have increased significantly. So those are the three biggest things that kind of equate to this first proposal.
Can I ask a question on that, if you don't mind?
Go
Sure.
ahead, Tom.
How are these costs derived? In other words, we always ask this when we do these, is how solid are these, how firm are these costs?
Good question. As far as the remediation costs, all this has been put together with feedback from local contractors. So our LEP, Weston Sampson, have reached out to local contractors saying, look, we have this job coming up, and just gave them kind of a quick summary, and they helped derive some of the costs for that.
Do you know, is this one contractor or several contractors? I'm trying to get a gut, as to our level of confidence in these costs.
Yep, another good question. I asked that question this morning, and the question is multiple subcontractors have been in discussion with these numbers.
Okay, thank you. And do you know whether that's true, just so that I get this out of the way, because I'm going to ask it at each stage, is that true throughout this entire estimating of costs?
That's correct, yep. Local contractors have provided us feedback for all the costs, based on the information that we know.
And what could blow us out of the water on the costs on the remediation here? You haven't said this is what I'm intuiting, is if the testing ends up at, and I know you did 80 or whatever borings or whatever you call them, that's my word, not yours. But if you're wrong on, and not you, but if the estimates of the amount of fill are wrong as being contaminated, this cost could skyrocket. Is that fair to say?
Tom, this is Tom Bremer. One of the main things that would blow this number out of the water is if the amount of fill underneath the building is more than is anticipated. As we sit here today, we are not 100% sure that we know how much fill is under the building. We have estimates, we have documents that the LEP has looked at, and so we have an understanding of what we expect to be under the building. But as I've said in previous meetings, there could be more. It could be another foot of material. We just don't know. And the borings that we've taken are not specific enough to give us an absolute accurate assessment of how much is under the building. So based on what we know today, based on all the estimates of what we believe is under the building, I think these numbers are very good. But however, having said all that, if there's more fill under the building, if the documents that we've relied on are not that accurate or weren't that accurate, then if there's substantially more fill under the building, these numbers would go up.
So Tom, the documents you refer to are documents going back to the construction when it was said how much fill was actually placed there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so you use the documents that said during construction, which is a requirement, we did this much fill, and oh, by the way, then you went back and did testing and said, of this fill, we found all this level of contamination. Based on these documents, this level of contamination, then you went out, and I'm just trying to get a sense here, then you went out to several different vendors and said, cost this out for us. What would it cost? Is that a fair way to see
Yeah.
how this was put together?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm it.
Yeah, I just don't, I mean, as we sit here today, I am unsure as to the accuracy of the documents that have been maintained by the town.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Doesn't that concern you that you're not sure of I mean, it's with an administration that historically didn't manage the process well, doesn't it concern you that there's an accurate record? And by the way, how much does that potentially change the cost of this estimate?
A, it does concern me. B, I can't answer the second question because we don't know.
Right, and that's just adds to the unknowns for me, and I would just add that, to me, all of this, there's so many implications, and the prime one is the cost of flood control and those implications for any option we consider. We just don't know what it's gonna do to this estimate. And I'd be curious, two things, Eli, if you could go back to this one, have you had any experts weigh in based on flood control and what that cost implication might be, sort of to the high end and to the low end? And then also in terms of, you had mentioned you weighed in with contractors and had people weigh in on this. Is there other backup to sort of show that? Because we're just relying on, and again, I hope everyone can understand the hesitance to trust data on a project that, again, we've all pointed out is before us for a third time. So, it just, I'm having trouble with this backup in terms of it being accurate, especially because it doesn't take into account an unknown like the amount of fill. We're guessing, we can conjecture based on maybe good documentation.
We've got to clean it anyway, though.
Right, but I just, again, it's a variable, because, one of the things you posed, Tom, from, in your, I won't call it a soliloquy, because mine was twice as long. It's just such an unknown, so, you pose the question, what are the costs of it? How can we answer that?
Right, I'm just saying, although I want the accurate costs and I want to know what we're spending, there's a certain aspect of this that we can't do anything about, and regardless of the other things, we've got to clean this, right?
I guess that you're highlighting exactly my point, which is sort of what I walk away from, and again, here with an open mind. We know we have to clean up a problem. That we don't have a choice over. And I guess there's the rub in what we do with the rest, and how much money are we prepared to spend to save something that in the end, we don't know if it's going to comply with FEMA because we've opened ourselves up.
Well, it's not FEMA, it's actually deep in this instance.
Well, no,
right?
with the building, if we repair a building.
So the option is to not rebuild the building.
But that's my point. That's why I say, we know what we have to do, and I would encourage us to focus on that piece of it, because we just open ourselves up to so many unknowns. So,
The question comes down to, do we rebuild or don't we rebuild, right?
but I'm just saying that the cost variable here is so great, because as you said, there's so many unknowns there. The cost implication for flood resiliency, the fill.
But the only thing you and I might disagree on this point is I'm not convinced, based on my discussions with FEMA and based on discussions with people within my own firm that do this, is that the elevation issue relative to Penfield, right, in terms of the length of Penfield, is the be-all and end-all as regards flood and erosion policy for the town of Fairfield. I think that's a much bigger discussion point.
Right, but it's not.
Than Penfield.
But it's not.
So that's why I say it becomes down to, do you want a pavilion or not? Because putting the pavilion there, right, and addressing this issue to be in FEMA compliance, in my mind, right, it doesn't preclude you from the rest of the discussion over flood and erosion control, which in my mind is a much bigger and much more expensive discussion.
And
That's all.
And I would offer, I believe, and again, we may not get past this point, because I believe.
Right, understand.
Philosophically, and again, my role here today may be just to pose these important questions and to give other people things to consider moving forward. Because for me, it's not just about beach elevation. It's about what happens when you lower a beam 3 feet and now you've exposed 3 additional feet, with the grade beam. You've now created a hole there. When we're digging and we open ourselves up for 12 to 18 months there. Says nothing of the ability to dig out, and Eli, I'd be curious if experts weighed in on this. the strength of the building to do that, to dig out while the building is still standing. Can it withstand that? It was in a parking lot in 2017, right? Is that,
So again, it comes down to rebuild it or don't rebuild it. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
Right,
Because
but-
with the time pressure and all this, it comes down to, you want to rebuild Penfield or don't you want to rebuild
But-
Penfield? The whole thing over the exposure, you're going to be exposed either way if you don't rebuild it. Now, I will tell you, I unfortunately got stuck down in Florida during the hurricane that was just down there. I can never remember the names of them. In September, I lived through that. And the FEMA recommended buildings did quite well during that. And the ones that got destroyed were not necessarily FEMA compliant because they came grandfathered in. And oh, by the way, I think if we went back and looked, at least from my memory, that's the same thing that happened down in the beach during Sandy, was the ones that had been built to FEMA compliance fared a heck of a lot better than the ones that had not, because they had been grandfathered in. So if it's a debate over how FEMA wants the buildings built, I can only go by that, my own personal experience with it, right, which is they did pretty good. And again, I'm not trying to debate it, and Nancy, you and I can agree to disagree, we might. I'm just saying, I'm just explaining how I'm looking at it and how I'm looking at the decision.
So if I could just jump in, and I would like Eli and Jim Went to talk about how they're separate. But I just want to reiterate what FEMA said, my understanding of what FEMA said during the meeting, and is that the grade beams being at the elevation that they're at poses the risk of the water at certain velocities hitting it and smashing the building up, and then making it a danger to the houses behind it, because now it's a big, giant piece of
at the
building.
current elevation?
Current elevation, smashing and running into other buildings. They did show a giant map of flooding and how the pavilion really doesn't look like it matters at all, because the 100-year flood is everybody's underwater. But again, just to be clear, and to Tom's point, he's kind of looking at it the way I'm looking at it. The building is valued at $7.4 million. It costs $3 million to put it at the level that they want. FEMA also mentioned at that meeting that they would not put other structures at risk. They wouldn't recommend or require a structure to be at an elevation that they believe puts other structures at risk. But I know that Jim Went and Eli have talked and have worked a lot with our flood and erosion board for quite a long period of time. There's a lot of studies out there. We have committed to adding resiliency studies, but that is a mammoth project. I mean, you're talking, as Tom mentioned earlier, the whole shoreline. I mean, fixing one small little section isn't going to prevent flooding from coming around it, over here, down there, and water moves, right? Water goes where it will. But I'm going to ask Jim and Eli if you could just highlight a little bit about the difference between the flooding aspect as opposed to the NOV, like Nancy had asked earlier, the flooding.
This is,
So, yeah, we're going to open it up to public comment. I'm sorry. I know, it's complicated. That's a higher elevation apparently at the beach, that it is houses behind it. Some are, Lolly Boulevard's low, Penfield Beach is high. They have this whole elevation map they showed. There's a lot of varying elevations throughout the beach area.
this is Jim Went. I really don't have anything different than what's already been articulated. That question came up during the FEMA town hall meeting, and it's FEMA's position that they don't believe that lowering the grade represents a significant risk for additional flooding. And I agree with what Mr. Flynn has previously articulated, that the pavilion site alone will not resolve the overall coastal flooding issues within the community. So it is a much larger issue than this one particular site.
Thank you, Jim.
Can
Eli,
I ask
do you
a-
have anything to add?
Yeah, and just to add regarding costs of resiliency, the it varies so widely. Resiliency could be as simple as like growing grass
Beach
versus
grass.
building a huge wall or, a flood wall across the whole coast. So it really, really varies. There's no, it really depends on where the permits and, what is going to be agreeable for the whole public and also the agencies as well.
To that point, can I follow? Wouldn't it be great if it was just plant some grass? And wouldn't it be great to know that? Because the flip side is if we have at great expense, now all of a sudden we've lowered a beam. And again, it's not the 100-year flood we're talking about. It's the, these local storms, the smaller storms that are happening that I think people are more sort of concerned about. I think everyone knows when they move to that area that the 100-year flood is a concern, but it becomes these daily occurrences that seem to be happening more frequently with so much having changed with the climate issue recently. But I feel like, again, we may keep disagreeing on this, so I won't beat this dead horse, but to me, if a study would show that it's just grass, great. But if a study all of a sudden shows that we've built this building and now we need to build walls and change this, and to the tune of $10 million, all of a sudden this manageable number is a behemoth and crazy, and now we're burdening the taxpayers even more. So it just feels like we're making a decision without all the pieces in place.
So I just want to jump in because I spoke about this during the town hall meeting, and I did share that link so that elected officials, if who couldn't attend, could, watch it. I know it was a long meeting, but I served on the Shoreline Task Force after Sandy in the legislature. There was an extraordinary amount of information shared at those meetings. One of them being, the seagrass, which the town has been engaged in doing. I mean, I had deep down here walking our coastline with Rick Grauer, who was, I think you were the chairman at the time of the Flood Erosion Board. I mean, there is a lot of different things that are going on now, but there are broader studies, big studies, and Eli can speak to that, the RACE study regarding coastal resiliency, and we've been so engaged in this for so many years. I mean, all these different ideas, some that are viable, some that are not tested, and that DEEP requires a bit more information about before, and they're very careful and cautious about anything to do with impacting the environment and things of that nature. But I have to be honest with you, after all that data, all that information, all those years I spent on that task force, that is still now ongoing, I don't believe lowering this pavilion is going to make a huge, mammoth difference. We do get flooding down at the beach, even during smaller storms, where DPW goes and will, broom out the sand out of people's driveways that came over, down at the peninsula in different areas. FEMA said repeatedly that they don't believe this change is going to significantly impact the area. So I don't know if this is a philosophical issue. We have a deadline to sort of get to by the end of the month to decide if we want to spend $3 million to remediate the notice of violation and put it in compliance with FEMA's regulations. That's really, and I think Tom's right, that's the question. Cleaning the soil is not the question. We have to do that. Tearing down all the decking to get at it. It's $1 million less if we just rip everything out, the decking, the pavilion, the bathrooms, the concession, and then just excavate the soil. I personally think our community likes that pavilion. I believe what I heard from FEMA to say that they don't believe this is going to cause any significant damage by lowering it a couple of feet, and that it's used. It's used. The concession stand is used by families and people across the town who go to the beach. And the deck is used, and the event space is used. Aside even from that, it's a facility, most beaches have some kind of something, bathrooms, concession, or some sort. For me, $3 million for a building valued at $7.4 million, to me is it's a no-brainer. That's how I feel. And I'm not saying everybody else should feel the way I feel, but it's the way I feel. And this is after sitting, and I said, hundreds of hours of meeting, many in this room, some at Penfield, before or after it got knocked off, and down at Sherman and various locations. It was a very hot-button issue. And so, honestly, our community has so many things it's struggling with. There's so many problems. It's sometimes insurmountable. And to me, to relitigate Penfield Pavilion for a third time just doesn't make sense to me. I think we should repair it, clean the soil out, and move on, and just move on. I want to work with our beach, our residents in the floodplain, 100%. And we partnering, Kristen, actually, McCarthy-Vahey's on that shoreline task force now. And to work together to have these studies, to work to figure out these studies, to always assist. Of course we want to protect. I mean, climate change is a real thing. I don't know how much we're going to be able to do to stop that, but at the end of the day, I think we could work together to figure out ways to mitigate flooding and nourish our beaches. And as I spoke to some members of the Flood and Erosion Board, working with DEEP to get permission to bring sand in, to protect the coastline when we know a storm is coming, like they do in Massachusetts, and things of that nature. There are things we can do. But I think it does boil right down to the bottom line. Do we want to spend $3 million to repair the foundation and address the notice of violation?
You know, put in those terms, it sounds very simple, but I actually think that it's not that simple. And I think that's the point of what we're discussing here. And I think it does a disservice to the community to say, oh, it's just about spending $3 million. Because if it were really that easy, of course, like, spend $3 million. I don't, maybe it's philosophical, I don't know. I just don't see it as that simple. And there are obviously a lot of people who've spent also the same hundreds of hours on this that agree with that. And again, my concern is that we're just not being mindful to the fullest extent. I think we're looking at this March 31st deadline, and listen, I know it was surprising in the sense of, like, they put a hammer down about March 31st, but the fact is municipalities go in and out of retrograde all the time. It's a mechanism that FEMA uses to make sure that communities do comply. But I think it does a disservice to residents to say we're forced to fix this, because again, let's not conflate the fill issue with the beam issue. Two separate things. So we have a choice to make. And I do think we have time, because March 31st, it's not like all of a sudden the town buildings are going to be impacted and we're not going to get insurance for the town buildings. The fact is, we go into retrograde, it's effective October 1st. It's probably 12 months, but what it's, before we could come out of it, we still can apply for a letter after that fact that says, look, we have a different plan. This is, you know, so we have a different plan, and here it is, and the boards have agreed to it. So it's not like this way or no way, and otherwise we're not in compliance. That's not true.
So just to be clear, and they were very clear in internal meetings and then at that town hall meeting, a retrograde is not exactly as simple as that. They start really inspecting all properties, and then they go through the building departments, which takes time away from our building departments to do their work. And now they start going through all our building permits and our zoning permits. It's kind of a bureaucratic mess that could uncover a whole host of things that maybe you necessarily wouldn't want to have to deal with. I don't view it as a simple, oh, it's no big deal, the retrograde, and then it comes back.
I'm not saying
I
it's
think
not a big deal.
I mean, the way they explained it to me in the internal meeting sounded pretty horrific and not an easy process to pull through. But I want to ask Jim Wendt if he could just weigh in here, because I know he has some more information that it's not just about 1,800 residents and our town buildings losing a discount. There's some other impacts that could potentially.
There are three steps. The retrograde is one thing, and assuming that FEMA retrogrades were no longer participating in the CRS program, and the town fixes the violation and we can reapply, that's at least a 2-year process, probably closer to 3, because we can't apply to be reinstated until there's completion of a project to make to cure the violation. So it's probably at least a 2-year period, if not more, over which that 10% discount would not be available. The next step, depending on how long it takes beyond March 31st to have a plan approved, there's an interim step that FEMA could take if they're not satisfied, which is probation, which adds another $50, as was articulated in the PowerPoint, another $50 surcharge. And then if we completely don't resolve the violation at some point, FEMA can suspend the town from the National Flood Insurance Program, which would mean flood insurance wouldn't be available. How long a time they would give us from going from probation to suspension, we don't know. But FEMA seemed to imply at the town hall meeting that it wouldn't be a huge time lag between the CRS retrograde and probation.
So respectfully, I listened again, and I listened through it at 2 hours and 30 minutes. And if you listen to that 20-minute discussion, Melissa, the question is asked specifically, and they get into this discussion about retrograde, and that's where she sort of makes the comment, like, this is something that happens, communities, it generally takes 12 to 18 months, and that if we come up with a plan that the bodies agree to, and we can show action towards it, and that could be defined in a lot of ways. And again, we're talking about a federal agency, and some of it is the whims of what they decide, so I appreciate that. But at least my interpretation and the interpretation of many people I talk to, they got that same sense, that it's not so doom and gloom, that this is a mechanism they use to encourage communities to be compliant, and that, you know, the 12 to 18-month period is more likely. And again, 2 hours and 30 minutes, I hope someone will roll tape, because at least that was my takeaway. And I think that, to me, when I weigh what that might be if we do go into that, we joined this program in 2016, I think. And right now, at least for that 12-month period, we're talking about the 1,700 residents, which I don't discount, because it wouldn't be me, so, you know, easy for me to say. But, you know, we're talking about a total of about $250,000. And I think, again, I want to go back to my initial comment that that's money that we could use ARPA funds for to offset those costs for those people that were impacted, to buy some time. Because, you know, now I circle back to what Tom had said about he's relying on experts. It'd be good to hear from the experts, as I said, who are going to say, and that this is not an issue, that the flood, had we fixed the beam from 11 feet to 8 feet, what would have happened this past weekend? It would just be good to hear from some of those experts on the record in the context of what our plan is. Because as I said, I just don't see it as being a $3 million fix. I appreciate the valuation has changed, different discussion. What if we go over that and then we're in violation there? Too many pieces for me at this stage, and I do believe that there are creative solutions to buy us some time. But
Jim, do you have any response to that?
I don't.
Can I ask you a question?
What, 1 minute, Tom?
It's
Okay,
going to be
go ahead,
12 to 18 months to cure the violation, and then a reapplication period. So I think it's more likely that it would be at least a 2-year period over which that discount would no longer apply. But
And again, the math is just about, if you make it 2 years, it's still about $250,000. So I'm not arguing
Well, I
that.
think you want to also jump in and I don't think we can use ARPA funds to supplement people's flood insurance, but Jim, you spoke to me the other day regarding how this could impact real estate transactions.
Well, that would occur if we fail to remedy the violation ultimately, and FEMA moves to suspension. That's the third phase that would eliminate us from that program. But that would have some potentially catastrophic marketplace. But that's a further down the road issue. What's not clear is how long a period they would provide between potential probation and potential suspension.
I want to be careful of the doom and gloom scenario, because I want to be really mindful that we have to make informed decisions. So to me, I appreciate that that could be on the horizon. I just don't want people to walk away and the soundbite they hear is, it's a catastrophe for real estate.
I agree with you.
Okay.
I think the more likely scenario, and I think that would only happen if the town just says, we're not dealing with this, we're going to ignore FEMA and not fix this violation.
Which, by the way, no one wants to do.
And I'm not hearing that as part of this discussion, but in clarity, the projected.
Sure you are. Actually, no, that's not true. You are hearing that. And I'm not begrudging that. It's a valid point. But you are hearing that people don't want to fix the FEMA violation.
Fair.
They don't
Yeah.
agree
Fair.
with the FEMA violation, and they don't want to lower the building
No,
because of it.
no.
And that's fair.
But actually, to be clear, I'm saying, I think it needs to be fixed. I'm saying that I'm not sure that the solution is lowering the beam. There may be another
Okay, but
alternative
that
on the
is-
table,
but that
which is,
But that is FEMA's solution.
yeah, but knocking down the building is another solution.
Right, and I think I just want to jump in here because, obviously my administration has been discussing this with FEMA for, a year. So I've been talking about this a lot. Knocking down the building is the other way to comply with the violation.
Right.
So is our community is just going to go, that's great. Put up a couple ramps to get to the locker room, we're done, right? They're going to be like, no, we don't want a concession stand. We don't want anything. I don't believe that for 1 second. And so then we are talking about Penfield Pavilion till again and again and year after year after year.
Well,
There-
can I say something else? So let's say that's the solution. Let's say that's the solution. Knock it down, and then FEMA comes back. They do what you said, and they 18 months later, whatever Jim went said, and they said, yeah, you know what? We agree. We were wrong. Do we then rebuild the pavilion? What do we do then?
Why would FEMA just question? Once the building's gone, FEMA has no jurisdiction.
No, but if we go back to them and apply to rebuild it, but that's what I'm saying, Nancy. So you've laid out the answer here. Is your position not to rebuild the building?
My position is that we don't have enough informed information to make a real decision.
But that's not, okay, but not making a decision right now is not an option.
No, but I'm arguing that it is an option, and that's what I'm saying is frustrating
Okay,
and short-sighted.
Then what? So we've tried that. Okay, we tried that. I was on the Board of Finance, and I was told we weren't going to make a decision. We were going to just appeal to FEMA, and we were going to go with it. That's what got us into this position in the first place.
But
It cost us $7 million.
But-
FEMA said, do this, and we said, nah, we're going to continue doing what we're doing. And they said, no, we're warning you, don't do this. And we said, nah. And we got experts to tell us and all that, and we did it. And now we're sitting here $7.3 million in the hole.
But
So I'm trying to figure out what the fix is. And by the way, the March 31st date, I get it and all that. But I don't know what additional information are we going to get that says that FEMA's going to change their mind.
that's
So
not,
then, if FEMA's not going to change their mind, the decision becomes, do we tear down the building or do we raise it? Or lower it, sorry.
what I'm suggesting, and, in your interpretation, it sounds almost flip, and I'm suggesting the opposite. I'm not saying we do nothing. What I'm saying is that we really interrogate the numbers. We look at the impact of flood and erosion, and we factor that in. And we
Before
give,
March 31st?
I think that, again, put the March 31st date aside, because to me, again, we're talking about, because we're not going to not do something. We're talking about $250,000 to invest in, to give us time, to give the boards an opportunity to weigh in on the financing structure, to give people.
Tom, you're on mute, Tom.
Can I, let me finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And so when you say, nah, I'm not doing something, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, here, let's look at the numbers, because the fact is, if there's any margin of error in terms of, there's no margin of error. I think we have a $750,000 margin of error in terms of the cost estimates before we exceed that 50% threshold from FEMA, from the build. So that, to me, is not a lot of error. And
The
And-
750 is based on how much, though?
But based on the construction costs and all the costs here that have been laid out in this math versus the 50% against the valuation.
So, but let me be clear. You just said something, we should spend the time in 250,000, but it's not $250,000 of our money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's residents' money.
Right, but we're also talking about millions. And what I'm saying is 250,000 buys us time, and we don't know that we couldn't
On the
use.
backs of 1,800 people.
But again, and I'm not diminishing that, I would say that, first of all, again, perhaps there is a way to be creative with the ARPA funding, and $250,000, could we offset that while we're making a plan? We don't know what the answer is to that. And I think it's worth investigating that, because to me, making that investment to pause, and I started by saying, I'm not belittling or diminishing what that would be for those 1,700 families. Prior to 2016, that 10% and 5% discount wasn't even an option. I'd love to go back to
But I just want to jump in for a minute, because to Jim One's point, it's not just 1 year. It's multiple years. And if the community doesn't coalesce around a solution, so for example, what I'm hearing you say is we should once again ignore FEMA, ignore their regulations, ignore what they're telling us to do to be in compliance with their regulations. I mean, the only other solution, so I don't know, either you're saying a vote to knock the building down to be in their regulations, or to just kind of kick it down the road and say, sorry, FEMA, we can't make up our minds. We're going to let everybody's insurance rate go up, which potentially could be for a 3-year period until we get brought back into compliance. I don't know how we're getting back into compliance unless we then decide to knock the building down, or for some reason figure out that, yeah, that $3 million wasn't that bad. We should have just did it in March. Either way, these people are going to be subjugated to this 3-year process of what didn't sound great, and I think they went into a lot more detail in our internal meetings, which didn't sound lovely at all for anyone involved, not for all of those individuals who live in the floodplain, who would have their houses reevaluated, and our town government would have all of this requirement and paperwork and permitting, and it's just, so, listen, I understand. I know it's frustrating. I've been frustrated for years now.
Can I go back to one thing here, if you don't mind?
Yes,
Yeah?
go ahead.
First of all, Nancy, I would never think that your opinion or your thought on that was flipped. So if that came across that way, my apologies, because I don't mean it like that. Mr. Nguyen, I wanted to ask you something. When the first select woman was speaking about the conversations with FEMA and stuff, and I really want to get off this point because I think we're going to agree to disagree at a certain level. But the first select woman indicated that there has been discussion that if FEMA were to get on this point, we were going to appeal it, or whatever the hell we would do to not move on this right now, but see if we could somehow get this changed. Is it in fact possible that FEMA then starts looking at other things as to, during this process as to whether we get reinsured or not? Are we opening up an additional can of worms? I just don't know the answer to that.
Jim?
I'm trying to understand, your question is if we are excluded,
So we
we
do
fall out of the
have-
CRS program and now we have to reapply to enter in.
Exactly.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
is the,
Well,
yeah,
that-
what is that process like?
We have a lot of the information that we currently have to, we go through a periodic renewal. Since 2016, there's an annual review that FEMA looks at all of the permit data that we provide to them for new construction and substantial improvements and to look under the hood, if you will, to make sure we're holding up our end of the deal on the permitting process. When we go into a CRS application, it tends to be a little bit deeper dive into that same process where, yes, they're going to look at our permit processes and they're going to come down physically and tour the town and say, all right, we're going to give you a list of 8 or 10 addresses that we have questions about. You've got to show us all the documentation and how those comply. So while I'm confident in how we administer our permitting process and that we're holding up our end of the deal, it is also not out of the question that a federal agency could, if they're looking to find issues, they can certainly find issues if they want to do so.
I mean, and I'm not trying to gild the lily hill or anything like that, but that's part of the problem we run into with the whole fill pile thing. Is it wasn't just the fill pile basically caused a whole bunch of other testing and all that found arsenic and other stuff that otherwise would have remained buried and out, because we're an old mill town and all that kind of stuff. Is that not true? Didn't that kind of tip the apple cart on that stuff too?
Well, I mean, listen, yes, to a certain extent, Tom.
I thought that's, Mr. Bremer, I thought that's.
Yeah, I
what
think
you
it's
said.
like 2 sites out of the 40. We had Jennings School that had fill, and then when they tested, they found arsenic from the railroad ties. Same thing with Gould Manor. All the fill
Right.
was used along the sidewalk. When the regulatory agencies made us test, you have to keep testing until you get clean soil. Well, unfortunately, there wasn't clean soil after the fill. There was now arsenic at higher levels. Yes.
That's all I needed to know, because I was concerned about that. I don't mean to go on and on about it, so, thank you.
Eli, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please, go ahead.
In your estimates, 2 things. How confident are you in these numbers? Because again, as I mentioned, there's a 750,000 cushion. It's not a lot of cushion. And historically, we are a town that tends to run over. I've been on the side of having to make those decisions. 1, maybe it's 3 questions. Second question, did you have experts? Listen, it's all nice that we serve on committees, and that we have experience, but did you consult with experts from flood and control and erosion to weigh in on this? Because, again, my concern, and I'm going to beat this dead horse, what if it's millions that we fix the building and then all of a sudden it costs us millions more in flood mitigation? So how confident are you in the numbers? Did you weigh in, did you get expert advice? I'm sure there's a third question in there.
So confidence as far as the estimates, we are very confident in the estimates as far as a conceptual estimate. This is the greatest detail we can put together without actually having real drawings on our, in our hands. As far as, and again, I said this before, but the local contractors, we did reach out to local contractors for feedback, making sure all our unit prices are aligned with what the current market is showing. As far as, the coastal engineering, we had Race Engineering, our coastal engineer. He is on board. He's a member of this project. And he's the one that's going to do all the coastal analysis, not he, but the firm I should say, is going to be doing all the coastal analysis for the actual project.
Who is this person? Sorry.
Race Engineering?
Oh.
Yep, Coastal Engineering.
Yeah.
It's a firm.
No, I didn't
Yep.
hear you say race.
Yep.
And they haven't weighed in at all in terms of their feelings on what potential flood erosion issues might be and why not?
Have they, is the question, have they? They have, yes. And again, there's no, what I like to say, magic bullet to solve all the flooding issues that we have on the,
We're not.
you know, in Fairfield. But specifically as for Penfield, they understand that in order for us to resolve the NOV, we need to lower the grade beam. So that's their understanding of this whole thing. And the coastal engineering, the analysis that they come up with will provide the information you are looking for.
Right, and I don't think anyone's looking to solve in this moment the entire coastal floodplain issue and the climate crisis, although that would be very nice. I think what we're trying to answer in an informed way is the impact of lowering that grade beam versus tearing it down. And I would feel a lot more comfortable personally voting for this if I understood that a flood or an erosion expert has weighed in and said, this is the impact for this building if the grade beam is lowered. And I just want to echo, because it's been said a lot, there are two ways to fix this NOV from FEMA. And so just to say there's only one choice, like, I think we just want to be careful there. And I think another thing that's, for me, weighing in this decision to tear down, to keep, is that I don't believe that we've been presented with three really solid options, which is sort of the demo ramp. You know, I don't believe that it's that, it has to be that basic. You know, it paints a dire picture when you sort of describe it like that, when it's just the ramp and the, no one, I think, is.
Can I ask one
You're
more
gonna interrupt
question?
me again?
So wait a
I'm
minute,
sorry.
I just want to ask Nancy to elaborate. What do you mean?
You're-
Because,
The demo option that you describe, and you're saying it's only a $3 million differential, I think that there's like another option, which is not quite dire, but is more, would be definitely less, it would make more of a differential, that it would cost less than what's being here. I mean, I think.
in what
Yeah,
context, though?
The backup for like the second plan is, 4 lines. It's hard to know based on what. It's not broken out in any way to make an informed decision, for me,
What do you mean, though? I don't know what you mean.
I
So
just,
the breakout is, so, to fix the gray beams and bring them into compliance is $3 million. The associated costs, ripping all the decking down in the back, all the decking around the whole thing, the retaining wall to get under the building to clear out the soil has cost. Now, the option was, okay, so if the town decides that they don't want to fix the pavilion, they want to knock it down, that's fine. I mean, I actually don't have a horse in this race. Whatever the town wants to do, I'll do, because I have a full plate of things to deal with, and talking about Penfield for the next, for a lifetime is not good for anybody. So if people want to knock the building down, well, okay, then the decks have to come off, they're gone because they're attached to the building. The ramps, everything, that's all gone. So now we get under the building, we save $1 million because we have to remediate if the fill is in accordance to what our reports are. It could be more. But then you wouldn't have, you have to build something to get to the locker room, because that could stay in place, and there are 2 bathrooms there that people could use. And so if no one asks for anything additional at that pavilion, no one says, I want a small hot dog stand, I want to have an ice cream stand for my children to have ice cream at the beach, I want something, I would like another bathroom that's more convenient, and we're going to have to build some kind of lifeguard station for them to keep their equipment and to be able to, do their jobs. So there are some associated costs with that.
Brenda?
So I don't know what other options you mean. So knocking it down, it complies, and fixing the gray beams. Eli, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just to clarify one thing. So whether we demo the building or we keep the building, the elevation will have to be 8. So demoing the building does not mean that the elevation stays to what it's currently at. demoing the building requires, per FEMA, that the elevation turns to 8.
But my understanding is that FEMA doesn't have jurisdiction over that, is it maybe deep? Because FEMA, once the building's gone, why does FEMA have any say on the elevation? Based on what again,
It includes all the agencies, basically, so it's deep, and then also the Army Corps, and then FEMA. So, yes, they do, essentially. They don't have jurisdiction because there's no longer a building there or a structure, but essentially, yes, we would have to get permits from FEMA and DEEP and all associated agencies if we were to do anything other than elevation 8.
Just to also be clear, you got to remember, we have to remove a tremendous amount of soil under that building. So it's going to be lower than 8 feet. So we're expecting to remove between 5 and 6 feet if that's what the invoices line up with. So we're going to have a conversation with anybody who regulates the floodplain area.
But-
What we can bring in, how big it can be, that's a whole nother situation as well. You can't just go running in there with dump trucks of soil, of sand, and say, okay, we took the building out, we took all the contaminated soil, which is between 5 and 6, maybe more feet, and we're going to just go throw some sand there. People are going to want to know what, they're going to be scrutinizing that.
I'm just, again, pushing back, because if we demo the building to, as a response to the NOV, and Eli, maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying, but that is a response, and it is one that they would accept, because they no longer have jurisdiction. But you just said, so then it takes care of the NOV, and it takes care of the retrograde issues. So, yes, of course, we have to get permits. Like that, I'm not arguing, but it doesn't add up what you're saying in terms of
But he's saying the
FEMA.
permits have to be 8 feet, right?
Right.
Is that what you're saying, Eli?
Who knows what they're going to.
FEMA is requiring us to bring the elevation, what they consider, back to natural grade, which is 8. So if we were to do anything other than that, we would have to ask FEMA for permission to do that,
If there's no building there?
even if there's no building
They
there.
say the natural grade, during that meeting, they had this whole elevation map, and they said that over a period of 100 years, or whatever they said, the natural grade was between 8 and 9 feet. So listen, we can argue,
Yeah.
that till the cows come home. All I know is that we have to remove between 5 and 6 or more feet under that building to get rid of all that contaminated soil. And then I'm quite certain that DEP and FEMA are going to want to have a lot of conversations with us before we start trucking sand onto that beach. And how much sand and what elevation it will be.
But to be clear, putting a new building there doesn't remove the FEMA concerns either. I mean, in terms of, we open
Then
ourselves
that's
up
a
to.
whole nother thing.
It's a whole-
And that's a whole
so-
lot of money to put a whole new building. And you have to comply
Correct.
with new FEMA regulations, because right now, we're sort of grandfathered in.
Can I respectfully, I have a lot of questions more about the financial structure and all that. Is it possible, would we consider?
One more question on this,
I was
if you
just
don't
gonna
mind.
s-
To
can I
let
just
the
finish my-
public,
I was
you
just
mean?
going to say,
Yeah, I
sorry,
would
let me just finish
prefer
my
that.
thought, just
Yeah.
so we can hear
I
from
would
them.
love that. I wanted to actually do that in the beginning, but,
I want to ask one question that could be relevant to the public. I've heard thrown out a lot, 1,800 people, $250,000. How do we know that's the right number? And would this, if the town loses it because of this, does that impact insurance rates in other areas other than just at the beach, AKA around Rooster River or anywhere else in town, or is it just this area?
I can answer that. Jim Wendt. There are presently 1,794 flood insurance policies in force. This is information we get from FEMA through DEEP in our annual CRS recertification process. So 1,794, that's not just coastal. So a retrograde would impact any flood insurance, whether it's a Rooster River adjacent parcel or Mill River adjacent parcel. That's not necessarily a coastal flood situation.
So this insurance situation isn't just the beach area?
Correct. It is all flood insurance policyholders, whether they be along the coast or whether they be along a riverine situation.
Okay, that's something that I was not aware of. That's a big difference as well. So thank you for that. And I agree with Nancy. I'll go right to the finances now, or Madam First Selectwoman, how you want to go.
We moved a lot of our items that we had scheduled for this meeting to be able to get this done tonight. I definitely want to hear from the public, but I also want this board to make an up or down vote tonight, because the Board of Finance has put together a special meeting and posted it for the 13th, and they need to have us send it to them. We are both ex officio members of that board and can be at those meetings and share information and whatever it is. But as the chief elected official of this town, I am asking our town boards to step up and make a vote, one way or the other, on this item. Whatever happens, happens, and we will just do what we have to do after that. Well, I will have to do what we'll have to do after that. So I want to open it up to the public to allow them the opportunity to speak, and then I want to bring it back to the board after that, if that's okay with the board.
Yeah, I want to comment on, I'm prepared to make a vote tonight. I just feel like, because
Before
I'll
1
have to-
a.m.?
Only because I know that's what we are, what is set before us. What I'm trying to make the case for is alternate things to consider. And I said at the beginning, I may be in the minority position tonight. I'm making all the cases for why I think we could delay, all the reasons why I am not supportive as it is. And that's why the importance of the questions, because it may be that tonight, not all that I get out, but what comes of it is that I've asked important questions for the next bodies to consider. But Eli, I have to push back a little bit, because I was looking at my notes from, and again, I've listened to the meeting twice, so I'm sorry if but, FEMA had said that if the building was gone, we basically can do anything to the site grade, build a dune. We just have to have the engineering studies to back that up, and as long as there was no adverse effect on adjacent properties. So I just want to state that for the record, because these are all the things that we just should be considering when making a decision.
Yep, what you said is absolutely true. And in that engineering analysis, at the end of the day, FEMA has the final decision on whether the engineering analysis that we submitted to them, says what we did, what we want,
Right, but it's circular, because they're saying as long as the engineering study is there, so, from the guy at FEMA.
Yep.
Right, that they
We would still have-
approve, so,
No, that as long as we have the engineering.
an engineering study that they will review with DEP. Now, just based on my work with this agency, and all, frankly, bureaucratic agencies, it takes a really long time. It's not like you send them things, and they go, oh, great, they turn it around in a week. It's not how it works. It's bureaucracy at its best. So it's not going to be, I just want to be clear, that's all.
Sorry, but yes, in answer to your question,
Right.
happy to
It
turn it
would
over
be
to the public.
Perfect. Okay, very good. All right. What am I supposed to say? Jackie? So there's a sheet, Prue, the secretary of the meeting, there's a sheet up and a pen to write your name and address.
Need to have names and addresses, please, on that sheet. And also, when you get up there for the record of the recording, please state your name and address.
You could just, you could line up or whatever you prefer.
Is this on? Hi, yes, I'm Katie Lawrence. I live on 6 Carlton Street. Okay. I'm Katie Lawrence. I live on 6 Carlton Street. I've lived there for 45 years. I am in the flood zone, although in the 45 years I've lived there, plus the other maybe 5 to 8 years the house was built.
You just have to push it once and it stays awake.
So you're
Yes,
okay.
stays on.
Yes.
Sorry about
So
that.
in all the time I've lived in Fairfield, and since the house has been built, never a drop of water, even during Superstorm Sandy. So we are very thankful for that. I just am wondering why FEMA feels like they are holding the people with flood insurance hostage, that we are the ones, this 1,700 or whatever, that are going to be paying extra for this. We have flood insurance that we've never had to use, plus flood insurance covers absolutely nothing. So I just feel like, how is the rest of the town going to be paying for this stuff? I mean, yes, if the pavilion is rebuilt, which I feel it should be, but why in the first place was it built with engineers who were not paying attention to the grade and the beams? We have to make this right. We have to make this right this next time. You know, it's been only a few years that this pavilion has been there, and now, you know, now we have to tear it down and do something. We're either going to have to tear it down, or the whole town will be paying for this, and we will not get FEMA and all the other agencies to support us. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate for anyone who didn't get, I sent out a Penfield newsletter update on Friday morning. It has a lot of good information on it. It's also posted on the town website. It explains sort of the history, the fact that the town's former administration received letters saying to stop building it. So there is some stuff, but there's also information, I think, lots of good information. Fairfield's way better than Westport. But I would encourage anyone, because it seems like a lot, based on a lot of the emails I got, some people did really read that update and took the advantage to click through the links, and some didn't. So I would hope, we took a lot of time to put it together, and I would hope the residents would take time to take a look at it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening. What is the time limit on a public comment?
Well, we were going to try to do 2 minutes, but I don't know if people are going to, I don't know how are we handling the online thing. Oh, so and I can't tell how many people we have.
Okay, well, I am Liz Ezema. I live at 160 Fairfield Woods Road, unit number 22. I serve on the RTM as a representative from District 4, and I'm the majority leader of that body. So I want to say first off that we know what happened. We know who was responsible, and he was thrown out of office. Who they hired in his place is someone who was supposed to clean this up. So let me explain a little about what the bureaucracy really is, and it's not FEMA. I'm not defending FEMA. That's a whole other issue. But as a member of a body that has to approve this expenditure or any expenditure, we have not seen, by we, I mean no one on any body that has been elected to approve this item before us, saw one piece of communication between the town and FEMA from 2018 until the present, until the middle of December. The second rejection by FEMA of our second appeal was in the spring of 2021. Virtually nothing has happened since then. We did have a presentation in August. None of the documents that First Selectwoman Lefkowitz and I pressed for, those were dated, of course, prior to the August meeting. However, we never saw them. So this is either a manufactured crisis or a crisis of competency, and I don't know which one. But the only reason we're sitting here with a March 31st deadline that none of us knew about, if that was a February 10th advice by FEMA, February 11th I should have had an email in my inbox or a phone call. And thinking the federal delegation is supposed to bail us out and save our butts, well, they have been engaged later than they should have. This is not their mess to clean up. They have tried, and they may continue to try, but I just want to say, this has been handled in a truly atrocious manner. The money that residents may lose was gambled a long time ago. Maybe you can figure out a way to take it off their taxes. I don't know. I don't work in town hall. I just know that I have to make a decision on something that I am not prepared for. Thank you to, Eli for his work and the outside information you've received, but there are very good reasons why those may not be accurate numbers that we don't have control over. The flooding is another issue. And I think the public needs to understand, when we use the word remediate, we're talking about the fill. When we're talking about the beam or the building, we should be talking about compliance spending. They've been conflated. They seem to be conflated in the resolution. I mean, I do this stuff and I'm confused, okay? The town needs to have confidence. This needed to have been more transparent, and to restore confidence in government, I shouldn't be standing here as the majority leader of a body saying, I'm confused. And I have until March 31st to figure this out. Absolutely no way. So I don't know what the answer is right now. I share many of Selectwoman Lefkowitz's concerns about making decisions for which there are, with all the sunk cost in that building, making decisions that may actually cost us millions more versus making a decision that many in the town, and by the way, it's hard to know what everybody in the town wants, because when they came to a town hall, they had to write their questions on a card, which were then selected. I mean, they didn't get to speak freely, so we don't really know. So I don't know what to say at this point, except this was not handled by any stretch of any imagination that would have passed muster in any world the way it should have. For me to have to, I mean, if somebody has a timestamp and they want to refute what I'm saying, that we, as elected officials, did not have a shred of communication from 2018 until present between this town and FEMA, you know what my email is. That is not transparency. We are in the pickle we're in because FEMA...
Ms. Esma, can you please start wrapping up? We do have
Yeah,
other
we are in the
people.
pickle we are in because FEMA clearly stated, 2 years ago, I am talking about the second rejection of our second appeal is literally almost 2 years old. Why I don't know about that is hard to explain to anyone listening to this.
Thank you, Ms. Esma. So just to clarify for the record, the FEMA rejection was June of 2021. The town started engaging with FEMA in July of 2021. It is not the responsibility of volunteer elected officials to work with a federal regulating agency. It is the responsibility of the CEO of the town to work with the federal regulating agency and negotiate a deal on a notice of violation. Now, whatever happened from 2018 to 2019, really not something I'm aware of. I wasn't here. And I wish some of the questions that have been asked of me were asked of the prior administration on many of these items.
Thank you,
Mr.
Brenda.
Camara.
My name is Ken Camaro.
It's very nice to see you.
Thank you, everybody. On December 30th, 2013, I walked underneath the pavilion with its natural grade of 8 feet, and I witnessed firsthand the flow of the, at that time it was a flood. It was not serious wave damage. It was basically flood damage, and I saw how it washed out the sand from beneath the concrete footings and the building settled. I saw that. That information informed the people that we hired to, as engineers and as contractors to build the pavilion, and in particular, the grade beam at 10.7 feet. They were not convinced that the 8 foot demanded by FEMA made any sense at all, and they went to 10.7 feet specifically because it matched the elevation of the retaining wall that's at the right end of the pavilion, facing the pavilion, and the sand dunettes at the left. That is the natural topography. And FEMA's own regulations say that you can match the topography when you're rebuilding the grade, and that is exactly what they did. I support Brenda in approving or seeking to get funding to solve the Julian fill problem, and I also ask her to get the money to put in reserve to change or to lower the horizontal grade beam, and also to rebuild all of the infrastructure, which has to be destroyed in order to lower that beam. They've got to destroy the sidewalks and the railings and all that sort of stuff, and it has to be rebuilt. Let me tell you with 100% confidence, FEMA has been gaslighting you since 2016 about the significance of the 8-foot natural grade. That is not a determinant. It is not in the Bible. It is not the only determinant in terms of deciding what the finished elevation would be. Let me further explain the significance of 8 feet versus 10.7 feet.
Mr. Camara, I just want to recognize I am trying to keep a 2-minute
May
limit
I-
so that everyone will have a chance, and a little over
Yeah.
2, so if you could just
May
kind
I
of wrap it up.
I'll make a couple, may I make
And I
make a
do
few more
have all
comments?
your emails too,
What, dear?
so I have all your emails too, and I
know.
think everybody
And
else does.
There is a new 27-page report on your desk that I've compiled, which is the case for defending the pavilion as it is now constructed. Absolutely bulletproof. And the reason is that FEMA failed in its ability to recognize rising sea level. I cannot believe how they're insisting on 8 feet when 10.7 with a higher berm protects the pavilion. My final point is this with regard to your remark. He talked about the beam elevation at 10.7. If the waves come in, it's going to damage the building. The 10.7 feet result produces a higher berm, which takes energy out of the waves, which is a superior solution to 8 feet. When the waves come up at 8 feet, if we lower the beam to 8 feet, the waves will come up to the edge of the beam, roll across the top, and go into the thing. That beam is a buttress. It's immensely strong against wave force. 10.7 is a vast improvement in the survivability and the storm resilience in the pavilion.
Just
That's what I like to say.
for the record,
Anybody who
what's
would
your
like a copy of my
profession?
report, try to
is he
contact me
coming
at
with this
Ken
information?
Camaro at optumonline.net. That's Ken Camaro at optumonline.net. Camaro has got 2 R's. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Mr. Camara.
Are we allowed to get for the record the source of the information you're citing?
Yes, send me your email, okay.
Can it become part of the public record,
I
or?
will get you a copy. I'm sorry, what did you just say, dear? I'm sorry.
So, sorry, Mr. Camara, so she wants to have a copy of what you just were talking about? So if you could email, you know,
In digital form. Brenda, right now, before I came to this meeting, I delivered a copy to her office. I didn't even know it, so anyway.
Okay.
If you could email the entirety of the board BOS at.
if he doesn't have an email, I'll have Jen
It
scan
just
it.
would be good, yep.
Very good. I get it. Fighting federal agencies are not the easiest thing in the world. Hi,
Hi,
welcome.
Warren Lappa, 200 Lally Boulevard. I assume that $15 million surplus means net new taxes, no net new taxes. If we appropriate $10.5 million out of the 15, do we have adequate funds remaining for all other fill pile remediation, plus any negative surprises?
So I just want to, for the record, typically this public comment is not a Q&A.
Yep.
Because it can go on for a really long time.
But I was hoping we'd get that clarification. Yeah.
Again, it's a bit more complicated. The fill pile itself is still under a tremendous amount of testing with the EPA and DEP. So we don't have a cost estimate on that and won't for some time. We're thinking, was it a couple million more, Mr. Bremer, on the
For
on
all-
the remaining sites, including, so Penfield is a site,
Yep.
right? It has a lot of soil. And then there's a few other sites. The big unknown is the fill pile,
Yep.
which we don't know at this point.
Is there a number in there somewhere that we've,
There's been wildly thrown out numbers from the regulating agencies, and
so
I wouldn't want to
Any
speculate.
allocation against that doesn't exist anywhere?
No, this is the funds, and I did, I did speak to some elected members on the Board of Finance, and we're looking at potentially a $5 million surplus in this year's potential that we could dump into that. And again, I want to put all the money we can, because I have no idea what that fill pile itself is going to cost.
Sorry, for the record, we were given estimates of between 12 and $17 million to prepare, so if Mr. Bremer could just speak to
For the
that.
fill pile itself.
And I think, isn't the question too, all remediation expenses?
That's right.
So to be clear, we were given an estimate of 12 to 17 million from Mr. Bremer.
That's correct, that's correct.
For the actual fill pile?
For additional fill-related
For all
issues.
fill
Every-
related,
for
but
everything,
there,
the whole enchilada.
but there has been a lot of speculation with these agencies, Nancy.
Okay.
They, it's not completed yet, it's an
Okay.
estimate, but.
So let's
we
say, so if we get, and I'll get out here in a second, if we get to the 10 to 15 million, that number, whatever it is, we're going to have to add additional funds for that through taxation, whatever.
Well, we were trying to use our surplus funds, and when we get like a big tax, a property that sells a big tax lien, we did this past couple years with the
Yeah.
Jack property.
Yep.
We got a big influx of cash. We
Yep.
like to put that money, toward this because of this situation.
But that's a whole, we don't know. We don't know.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And of course, I just want to remind everybody, if everybody has any questions they want to ask, you can email the whole Board of Selectmen, you can email me. So go ahead.
We good?
Yes.
All right. Good evening. My name is Jim Bowen. I'm living at 44 Fox Street. I'm just a few blocks off of the beach. I'm one of the people that'll be impacted by the loss of the flood discount. Mine is $158. I believe you're right, Mr. Went. I think it's going to take 2 to 3 years, so my family will pay $575 with the discount and 2 years' worth of probation fines. I am confident that if we rush to meet this arbitrary deadline, the cost to my family will be significantly higher than the cost of you taking your time to make sure we get this right. So I'm going to ask you tonight to vote no on this. Do not send this to the Board of Finance. Take your time. Get good cost estimates. Take your time and build out the options for the people to look at. Take your time to understand the actual flood impacts and what it's going to cost to mitigate those. You guys have spent a lot of time talking about the 100-year flood, right? We all know that that is not the issue that reducing the beach height is going to induce, right? So take the time with your people and figure it out before you make an irrevocable decision if we decide to go with your plan and keep the pavilion as is. And then take the time to inform the public. Engage with us so that you will in fact know what we want. You've got about 100 emails out of 42,000 registered voters. So I'm going to argue we don't have a great sense of what the public at the large wants. I appreciate the time. You guys have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to, for the record, we are a representative government. I was thinking about this the other day. When I served on the RTM from 1999 to 2001, in a 2-year period, that RTM appropriated $260 million in school construction in a 2-year period. We reopened a second high school. We built a third middle school. We renovated Tomlinson. We tore down McKinley and rebuilt it, and we built Burr Street School in 2 years. Because there was all this backed up stuff that people did not want to do or were holding back on. And we were able to do a lot of good for this town. I get it, people want to have, every single person weigh in the town. But at some point in time, as elected officials, you got to make decisions based on what you think is right.
Hi, I'm Jill Vergara. I live at 271 Old Post Road. Thank you so much for your service, Brenda. I know that you've spent years serving this community, and I thank you for that. I agree with Mr. Camaro and his concern about lowering the elevation, the beach elevation, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, and some comments made and representations made about what FEMA said at the town hall. I think that FEMA was focused on the 100-year flood, and what a lot of us in the beach area took issue with is that's really not what's most concerning to us. We know that the area is going to be overwashed in a 100-year flood. What's more concerning is what happens and what's happening more frequently with normal storms, like what we had in December, where it did flood certain areas of the beach, but thankfully it didn't overwash the Penfield area, and that's largely because it's the elevation that it is right now. And so FEMA did not address that issue. What they spoke about was the 100-year flood. They also didn't speak directly about the issue of the implications of lowering the beach elevation. They didn't say it would be no big deal for us. They didn't say much about it at all, and that's concerning to me, and I do think that it should be part of our calculus. I think that there were comments during that meeting also that there would be different implications for the options put out for the beach elevation. Maybe we should rewatch the meeting, but the way that I heard what the FEMA representative said was that it was a completely different situation if we were to remove the obstruction, the violation. So it was completely different if we didn't have a building there, and our ability to replenish the beach afterwards. And I also wanted to comment on my concern about FEMA's 50% rule with lifting and the implications for this project. So I know that we're saying that $3 million is being put in towards renovations of Penfield, and like Selectwoman Lefkowitz mentioned, that doesn't really give us much wiggle room for making the 50% threshold. And I wanted to see if we have a plan for addressing that and how much that would really cost the town if we ultimately had to lift the building. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Dick Mahusky, and I live at 241 Colonial Drive in the beach area. So I sent a letter to all three bodies stating my opinion on this matter. So I'd like to just read a couple of excerpts from that letter. I urge you to take a deep breath and, obnoxious as it is, approve the $11.5 million project scope to restore the pavilion. Some residents are supporting a less costly solution, but at what cost in lost public amenities? I believe that the benefits to be enjoyed by our residents for many years to come exceeds the differential cost of $3 million. The pavilion is a town-wide asset that went through 2 confirmations of the desirability of all its features by building committees, town bodies, and finally our RTM, representing all residents. I expect the $3 million differential will be bonded for 20 years. Simplistically, that makes the annual principal payment $150,000 or $7.50 average for each of our 20,000 households per year. Time is of the essence. If we are to be successful in convincing FEMA to pause the CRS retrograde notice, as Melissa Charette offers in her 227 letter, we must act immediately to adopt and fund a plan. The $11.5 million plan has been discussed with FEMA during the summer and fall of 2022 and is that way forward. Do not get trapped going down some rabbit hole of redesigning the structure or mixing and matching attributes. Part 2. I'm a member of the Flood and Erosion Control Board. In November, 2 members met with Mr. Bremer and Mr. Gazil, who reviewed the current plan with us. The Flood and Erosion Control Board then sent a letter to the 3 boards on November 23, 2022. Some excerpts from that. I quote, Flood and Erosion Control Board wants to underscore as the project proceeds. There are 2. Can't read my own notes. There are 2 items that Flood and Erosion Control Board wants to underscore as the project proceeds. First, the coastal engineering study must take the existing engineered beach plan for the pavilion site into consideration. Now that we expect a lower limit on sand elevation will be required by FEMA, the funnel effect between the Durrell Pavilion and Rickards Beach from tidal surges will exacerbate beach erosion. Additionally, with a lower sand elevation, the useful beach width at high tides will be reduced, thus restricting the areas for residents to enjoy it without being blanket to blanket. Second, the flood impact study must focus on the reduced resiliency to storm surge the now lower beach will provide at the site. Without the interdiction of the beach sand, other means must be provided to not only restore but increase the resiliency to coastal flooding for the neighborhood beyond the beach. Recall that Fairfield was unsuccessful in getting DEEP's approval for a sand-filled geotube on the water side of the pavilion between Durrell and Rickards. That suggests a resiliency measure is more likely to be successfully permitted landward of the beach, a flood wall, an elevated roadway, something, unquote. The comments that were made earlier tonight is food for a lot of discussion in my mind, but that's for another day because time is of the essence, as I said. This is way too early to guess what the cost of constructing a mitigation element at the Penfield site might be, but that is not part of this project. First, Selectman Woman's categorization of the effort is all we expect to come from this project. Then the town will have a new project to consider. If anyone wants to talk about the $50 to $500 million topic of flood mitigation in Fairfield, come to our Flood and Erosion Control Boarding meetings the third Tuesday of each Monday, or each month. Part 3. In order to continue the transparency during the process, I suggest that the town's project team provide monthly updates at an open meeting so residents can see that you are earning the confidence you ask of us. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service on that board. You've all been at it for a long time on the Flood and Erosion Board, and the town appreciates your efforts, and it appreciates you being meeting with us to discuss these plans. Mr. Grauer.
You've all got a very difficult decision in front of you. I got a couple of questions because they always say that the devil's in the details. You've got to remove a tremendous amount of sand from in front of Penfield Pavilion. Where are you going to put it? FEMA clearly said at the Ludlow meeting that if you're going to raise the elevation at a beach any place, you have to have an approved study from them to do that. Shouldn't the flip side of that coin be you need an approved study if you're going to lower the elevation? They haven't produced a study to say that lowering the elevation isn't going to adversely affect any of the neighboring properties, but they're telling us to do it. But if they want us to, if we tear the building down and want to build the berm, we have to get their permission to make sure it doesn't damage any surrounding properties. I fail to see the logic. I'm not here to tell you to build the pavilion or not build it. 1 second here. I also had the misfortune of being chairman of the Flood and Erosion Control Board during this whole thing and attended most of the meetings. And it was a bit of a zoo. It went on for, I think, 4 years.
It did.
And hats off to the volunteers that were on that building committee. They put a lot of time and effort into this. And I find it very frustrating that more people in the public are not getting involved with this.
I think they're tired.
They are, and they're all busy running their own life. Another sort of in-the-weeds situation. The 2006 survey that was done on the pavilion, and I believe it was a LiDAR survey, shows between the parking lot and the pavilion some elevation 12 and elevation 10. It extends from the west side all the way over to about the middle of the rental hall. Is FEMA going to let you keep that? Because they're going back and saying you've got to go back to an older survey. Well, there's an older survey in 2006. We shouldn't have to remove that. But to keep the fill there, you got to keep a retaining wall between the parking lot and that fill so that it doesn't wash out. And again, my real concern is the homeowners behind the pavilion. And I've met with Mr. Bremer, and he talks about the 100-year storm. Probably 80 or 90% of the people who live south of the Old Post Road know that in a 100-year storm, they're going to get some water. But they're not ready to accept water in a 5-year or a 10-year storm, which is a term that FEMA uses, or a 1-year storm. My concern is if you go down to elevation 8, and maybe you have a choice or don't have a choice, I've also presented to you guys some alternate ideas on how to contain floodwaters. Basically, if you were able to keep that wall that separates the parking lot from the pavilion at its current height, who cares what you take the beach to?
So I'm sorry, I probably should have said this, but we should have our comments really pertain to the actual agenda item, which
Okay.
is
What-
the
one-
bonding, either the original bonding item for $3 million, and then the
right,
the amendment that would appropriate the funding, $4 million from,
All right.
4 million for, I'm sorry, but that's typically how we're supposed
Okay.
to, and I've kind of
I'll-
given some
I'll stop-
deference to
I'll stop that
people.
and stop it quickly. You had originally said that you had money set aside to do this, but tonight you're asking for $3 million in bonding.
So
And-
the item was originally $3 million, just for everyone's edification, and I'm going to hold it from now on, the rest of this to be, how we formally
right.
speak to the item.
All right.
So it's $3 million was the original appropriation on capital. And then the amendment that we are discussing that still is on the floor with a motion and a second to amend, well, strike all really, is the one that would be $4 million from that fund related to the remediation at Penfield Pavilion, 3.5 related to the construction at Penfield Pavilion, and $3 million related to the work to address the notices of violation under the pavilion. So that would be the item we should be speaking of
All right.
now.
Well, the other thing is, tonight, you've mentioned the building is valued at $7.4 million. I believe if you go to Vision Appraisal, it says 7.2. As of February 9th, it was 3.3, and on February 10th, it became 7.2. The change never went through the Board of Assessment.
So we're going to stand at this item, speak to this item and this item only. I know there were some emails that went back and forth about appraisals. Happy, if you could reach out to the office, I'm happy to have Jackie share any information
Okay.
she's received.
Thank
But
you for your
thank
time.
you. Thank you very much. So again, I'm just going to, I know we have a few people online too, but I want us people to speak to the actual item that has been, the item and the item as amended. Hi, how are you?
Hi, First Selectwoman Kupchak and everyone. Thanks for being here.
Your name, sorry.
No, I'm doing it, don't worry.
Okay.
Expect everybody to know just by the only short person. Okay, so Sharon Pistilli, 107 Loda Drive, and I am a member of the RTM in District 3. I just had one comment in terms of process for the record. I'm looking at a letter from Mr. Bremer to Daisy Sweeney of FEMA dated November 2nd, 2022. And in the letter, it says, as I mentioned in our previous meetings, we are keeping in our time schedule and are planning to begin the project sometime in December 2022. We have already selected through an RFP process a construction manager, an architect with a team of structural and geothermal engineers, and an LEP, and it goes on. I just don't remember this item being on our agenda at all in November of 2022, so I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Bremer can clarify, but I know that, we were in negotiations with FEMA for some time. It may have been an RFQ to get some estimated items to be able to share with boards and commissions, because we were hoping that we were going to have a sign-off well, we didn't get a full, really sort of approval of our plan till January, but we really wanted to, because FEMA was breathing down our necks pretty good. And they wanted us, they kept saying, are you putting this before a board? Are you putting this before a board? So let's get moving. And so we were getting some RFQ information so we could be prepared to do that process. And then they signed off in January. But I was getting indications from town boards that they wanted more additional information. So what would be the point of putting something on an agenda if it's just going to fail? And I really wanted to try to get as much information as possible. And I really wanted FEMA to do a town hall. And to be perfectly honest, they weren't really inclined to do one right away. And I asked the congressman to assist, and he was able to do that, and we were able to have our town hall. And we used index cards because people felt that that was a more controlled way, not necessarily and it's typically used during our League of Women Voter debates as well. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen McCormick. I reside at 305 Winnapogue Drive, and I am a member of the RTM in District 2, but I'm here speaking on my own behalf. I am a lifelong Fairfield resident. Having grown up here, obviously I've been to all the beaches, and I will tell you that in my last 30 or so years, I can't say that I've been to Penfield personally to use the beach the beach amenities, but I can certainly appreciate what I've heard around town about people that utilize those services, whether it's the bathrooms, the catering facility, or the hall, I should say. And I believe that we would be very short-sighted if we acted from a place of emotion and made some kind of a emotional decision to not want to spend some additional sums to correct the problem that's there. It's quite unfortunate that the town is faced with this very difficult situation, and certainly to no fault of perhaps anyone in this room, but we are here because of malfeasance. We are here due to negligence on the part of people that were entrusted with our funds and our goodwill, and they violated that trust, and that's why we're here. And I don't think that the generations to come should have to pay in the future and having to drive by Fairfield Beach Road and look at either a very menial setup or to not have the beautiful building that's there. And I think it's not a small sum of money, I would acknowledge that, but in the grand scheme of things, in light of all the other monies that we spend on various things in this town, to extend a little bit more, to invest in our future is the right thing to do. I don't want to drive by Penfield and look at an empty space or a very small, lacking facilities for our townspeople. So I encourage the Board of Selectmen to vote yes on the proposal, and I intend to support it moving forward when it comes before the RTM. Thank you.
Can I just ask you which proposal you were in favor of, if you don't mind?
The
amended version?
Yes, the amended version.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Press once or no? Yes?
I don't think you have to touch it.
Hello, I'm Megan McLeod. I reside at 2815 Reading Road, and my house does not flood in a 100-year storm or any of these other situations, so I am in a unique position of not having such a horse in this race. But I do think that we need to acknowledge, especially for the people on WebEx that can't see the audience, that there's two travesties before us, and one is that we've got a room of about 20 people handling an issue, paying attention to an issue that impacts 60,000 residents that are now left with cleaning up the second travesty I'm going to get to, which is criminal misconduct. And we're all dancing around it, and we can all get up here and say that there's an issue of a fabricated disaster or misconduct and lots of competence issues. But the reality is nobody was elected to take this job to clean up somebody else's mess. I don't think that was in a job description. I didn't see it. We are all here with a bunch of information showing us that over the last 2 years of your administration has been linked to having to clean up issues that taxpayers are eventually going to have to pay for. And what does that mean, right? How are we paying for it if it's just in approving this bond and fixing Penfield? We continue to uncover all of these issues that we know tie back to criminal conduct of people that are not being held accountable. We've made some progress in holding certain people accountable, but there's a lot of other players that we have all kinds of information are tied to this and are just sitting back and watching this happen. And we're the only ones in this room that are figuring out what's going to be done. We've got to pay for this, there's no doubt, and I think we've danced around the fact that we might say there's devil in the details, but if you really zoom out, we're either going to spend $12 million to fix something and have nothing to show for it, like we continue to pay for things that have been taken away from us by people who have not done their jobs, or we're going to pay $15 million to actually have something out of it and maybe have a chance of recouping that money back. And I think that that's where we need to focus on the fact that in any other insurance claim, when there's damage done and you can prove that somebody was either negligent or somebody actually did something wrong, you subrogate and you try to make that money back. You either do it through the criminal justice system or you do it through adding revenue streams somewhere else. But the reality is Penfield Pavilion provides a uniquely special asset to the town of Fairfield in which so many residents not only enjoy it, so many senior citizens get respite sitting on that covered deck, but people move to this town and decide to pay into our taxes because we have an amenity such as that. And I think that we've identified a bunch of different revenue streams that we currently have, but we haven't fully vetted opportunistic revenue streams, whether that's opening a public restaurant that people can benefit from in our community, whether that's expanding access to things that actually raise money for the town. We're also not calculating things that happen in those facilities that really raise money through nonprofit fundraisers. We've talked a lot about the rental fees. We haven't talked about the different fundraisers that are organized by community leaders. I'm one of them, I've done many of them, that have raised tens of thousands of dollars for cancer foundations and for different organizations that go right back into our community, and that has value. It's not easy to quantify, but it's there, and it makes Fairfield what it is. I think we need to stop dancing around the issue that there's some major players that need to be more held accountable for their actions that continue to bring us to these rooms to make these votes and to vote on these huge amounts of money, but we really don't have that much of a detailed choice. We're either going to spend $12 million to just have nothing at the end of the day, or we're going to spend $15 million to continue to reinvest into our town. So I think we can really break down the details and confuse a lot of people with engineering and floodplain, reports and questions about, well, what if we have to spend so much more on a wall, on a retaining wall? But the reality is none of that will matter if we spend $12 million to just have nothing. And so I urge you all to consider voting in support of saving Penfield Pavilion. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want as a point of order, if I could.
All right, I just want to continue with the,
I
I
know,
think there's one person
But it's a
on.
point of order, and
Okay.
I just want to say for the record that, you had made the comment that the comments should be limited to, I'm actually very interested in everything everyone has to say, and I'm for it.
Yep.
I just think the comments are not, if they're moving forward, and I don't know who's left to speak.
I think that comment was related to, I want to spend the money to fix to the actual impact. That comment to me sounded like, I want you to spend the money to
Listen,
fix it.
I'm for every comment. I'm
And that
just
was for the
saying-
item. That was the item
Okay.
that we're looking at. Although the person said 15, it's really 11.5.
And then that was my second for the record. The item, the amounts
11.5.
amounts referenced were not correct.
So I will, Jackie, do we have anybody? Becky Bennell? Becky?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Becky Bunnell. I live at 2005 Fairfield Beach Road. And thank you for letting me speak, and I'd like to thank everyone who's sitting up there today, even though I can't see you very well because I'm on the WebEx, for all the hard work you've done trying to put these proposals in front of us, because I know a lot of work has gone into this, and I thank you for that. I would like to make a strong impassioned plea that we find a way to make this decision by 3/31 in order to avoid being put in retrograde. I think what Jim Wendt said is very important, and we need to hear this, that once we go into retrograde, we won't come out of retrograde for 2.5 years. So we're really talking about, close to 1,794 people paying flood insurance premiums for 2.5 years. It's going to be about it's $500,000 is what the cost is. But it's worse than that, because as Jim said, once we get put in retrograde, we have to appeal to get back off of retrograde to get down to our Class B standing. And what that means is that FEMA will come and do an exhaustive search of all of our buildings, and they may uncover other things that would, keep us in retrograde, forever or, for a long time while, we fix 10 other buildings. I don't want to put our town in that situation, so I strongly want us to make this decision by 3/31. However, I also feel like we're making a decision that without a lot of information in a very, I don't know, I guess what I'd say, compressed timeline. So I would like to recommend that we change the motion that's on the table to recommend a gross funding, not broken out, of 11.5 million, and that all three bodies get behind that and say to FEMA, we are agreeing to spend up to 11.5 million. And then what we do is we move the pavilion part of the building to the parking lot, proceed with the removal of the grade beam, which addresses the notice of violation. And that buys us time as a town to put a small interim building committee together with the objective of coming up with a short list of options and costs to be voted in November by town residents. I also buys us time to do the resilience study and have initial meetings with FEMA and DEEP so we understand what we're talking about to build resilience back. I know that's not great because it does add additional cost. When you move a building, there's costs to lift it and then put it back again. I was told that was roughly 1.5 million, but by moving the building, the cost to actually remove the grade beam and fill saves us $1 million. So of that 1.5 million to move the building, we actually make back $1 million by a cheaper way to get rid of the fill. So it's really an additional cost of $500,000 down, which gives us the time to vote on these things in November and make informed decisions that the town bodies can get behind. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Jackie? Representative Kuhn, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, Representative Kuhn, sorry, I can't access the chat, so.
Oh, okay. Sure, go ahead.
John Kuhn, 125. I would appreciate getting 3 minutes, 45 seconds, since that's what Mrs. McGloat got. I want to echo.
There was quite a few people who got a lot of time, but, and Becky Bennell as well. She went past her 2 minutes. But we'll give you more than 2. How about 3?
I want to echo what that person just said. I think that's a great approach. It gives us the ability, if the remediation of the fill pilot, again, let's not conflate terms. If that happens, that to be more expensive than what we are anticipating right now, we can change course. But it will tell FEMA that we have decided to engage on remediation of the fill pile and also compliance with the NOV by ultimately potentially fixing Penfield back to where it was. But it protects us against all sorts of cost overruns, which after our experience with Gould Manor and the administration coming to the RTM after the fact, having spent the money to ask for us to approve it, would not be a great thing with this kind of a project, which is in the 12 million-ish kind of range. I'm also curious if you'll post the appraisal report for the 7.5 million, since the posting of material has been woefully inadequate. I'd also am curious, there was a statement that First Selectman Kupchak, I believe you just made, that we had said to FEMA we were in process of a project in January. Maybe you could clarify that?
What I said, sir, was that we had a design after much negotiation that we submitted, and we heard back in January that it was amendable, that it met the criteria. It's called a design, a schematic, or, complying with the NOV.
And in that schematic, it presumed a rebuild of the Penfield Pavilion?
It was to respond to the notice of violation regarding the gray beams.
But did it include a rebuild of the Penfield Pavilion?
So.
I'm going to call a point of order.
Yeah, it's a point of order.
Sorry.
So you can ask these questions if it does, in fact, ever get to the RTM. But I just want to comment that we've been posting a tremendous amount of information on the website. We send
There
out
are
a
9 documents.
we send out a bi-weekly newsletter that reaches over 26,000 households.
That's great. I'd like to see the
And again, we are working very diligently to put up information as we receive it, updating the Fill Pile website, and now that Penfield, we have been uploading information as we receive it. There is also a ton of information in the Penfield update that I sent out on Friday morning. It had a tremendous amount of information, including links to all documents, and it included, I believe, I don't know, somewhere between the area of 30 and 50 newsletter updates on Penfield and Fill Pile. But we're always happy to provide any additional information you need.
You promised at the town meeting you would post all documents on a
Mr.
separate
Kuhn,
site.
Mr. Kuhn, that was last week, and we're all working really hard, and we're doing the best we can. Is there any further comments? You've gone obviously way above your 3 minutes. 2 minutes,
Well, you
actually.
have to get there, but yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry? Mr. Ed Humiston?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's Humiston, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, I've been called worse.
Well, it actually says Humiston in the chat.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's just the spelling. I'm on 25 Fox Street, and I just wanted to share something, and I wanted to ask a question. First thing, what I'd like to share is I was down on the beach Saturday night, about 2 in the morning, and if the beach had been at 8 feet, that small storm would have come over and flooded the neighborhood. And my other question is, I was under the impression that last Thursday night, the representatives from FEMA, and I'm asking for some clarification on this, said that if the building came down, as long as it didn't negatively impact the surrounding area, we could build that beach up to a higher level to protect from flooding. Is that correct? I see a video on FairTV that says that as well.
Eli? Eli? I mean, we're not supposed to be really answering questions during public comment, but we're kind of breaking all the rules tonight, aren't we?
I apologize. I missed the question. Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just confused about something. My understanding was that Thursday night at Ludlow, the FEMA representative said that as long as it didn't negatively impact the surrounding area and the pavilion was removed, we would be able to build the beach back up to a higher level than 8 feet. There's a video on FairTV that has that chatting.
Yeah, that is correct. The town would have to submit engineering analysis and reports to FEMA to show that it does not have a negative impact on the surrounding neighborhoods. And then it's at FEMA's discretion whether that engineering analysis has impact or does not to the neighborhoods.
All right, terrific.
Thank you.
So if the building's gone, we could build the beach back up to a higher level. That's correct, right?
Well, it would have to be engineered to my understanding, and it would have to be approved by DEEP and FEMA.
Right, that is a possibility. Because Brenda, you sent me an email over the weekend that said that it was non-negotiable.
It was non-negotiable, the 8 feet with the building there.
Yeah, I had asked you about the building being removed, and you said it was. You said whether or not the building was there or not.
But my understanding was 8 feet. But again, I think we would have to Eli's point, I don't know. I guess we would have to have engineering studies and get sign off, which I would imagine, just based on this experience with FEMA over the last year, wasn't really quick.
Yeah, I was just confused by your email because you said building or not, it was non-negotiable. It had to be at 8 feet.
The elevation 8 is non-negotiable for the notice of violation. In order to resolve the notice of violation, the final elevation needs to be 8 feet. Now, whether the town wants to, further send analysis and prove that, we want to add 2-3 feet, that is, we can always do that, but that's at a future, that's after resolving the NOV.
Right,
And
the
that
building's
definitely
been
has to be
removed,
engineered.
correct?
You can't just do it without approval.
Right, but that's with the building removed, correct?
Yes. I think.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Durrell?
Yes, Alex Durrell, 64 Woodcrest Road and RTM 3 for the next 245 days. But who's counting? Anyways, a couple of years ago, at a Republican caucus, Jim Brown was going over stuff. And he was going over the cost of things, and I interrupted him, as Tom Flynn might remember, like I interrupted him that meeting a few times, and said, is this going to be an 8-figure problem? He said, I don't know. It grows every year. With inflation, it's only going to get more and more. Hopefully we can build it and move on. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and let us go forward together.
Thank you. If there's no further comment, would like to bring it back to the board. Seeing none, thank you so much. All right, we'll come back to the board.
The board would like to take a 3-minute break if possible.
The board would like I think,
This member of
bathroom
the
break.
board.
So, okay, 3-minute bathroom break. Open it up to the board.
I'm just going to say, I have a few.
Sure, go ahead.
I have a few follow-up questions, comments. I'd like to get the sense of the body on something for the record.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Jerry. As I said, I have a few follow-up questions, some comments. I'd like to get a sense of the body on something. I'm not going to dig into points and keep reiterating because in the interest of everyone's time.
Sure.
I just want to make sure that I've made my points. A couple things I want to address from the comments. You had said, what's the point of putting something on the agenda if it's going to fail? I just want to push back on that and just say for future management, I think there has been expressed interest for at least many months, going back to the August, and if not before, but I certainly can speak to August and that town meeting and the request for information. I don't think any of the boards, and I'm not going to speak for the various board chairs or the majority leader, but the point of putting something on the agenda is to have the discussion and to be transparent. And, you know, I just hope we all collectively learn from that, because as two of the speakers, Ms. McCormick and Ms. McCloat referred to, you know, we are paying the price for bad decision-making in the past. And, you know, I think that's why the interrogation of this process is so important. I think we all are feeling the sting from that. We're all wanting to make sure that doesn't happen again. And this idea of like, trust us because is not enough. And I think the asking the questions, the interrogating of the process, the making sure that, you know, we're considering certain things. And considering certain things, including what Mr. Mahusky said about the importance of, as the Flood and Erosion Control Board, as the chairman, I believe, had said, I think he alluded to the importance of, you know, having the knowledge of what costs are to mitigate the effects of lowering the grade. So these are things that I do think that should not be separate. I want to address the issue of the loss of amenities. I think that there are solutions we should consider. We should consider what a lesser option looks like, because we do have the ability to do something really beautiful at the beach that's not a massive building, if that's what the bodies decide. We have Jackie Durrell. Could we spend a little bit money to jazz that up a bit? I understand that Burr Mansion, that rentals have been stopped on that because of concerns, and I think we should really look at why we're not advocating to rent that more. We've got the Fairfield Museum. There's lots of assets that we have that I think we should be not forgetting. And it doesn't mean the loss of the use of the beach. I would say that there was...
Nancy, on Burr Mansion, I thought the issue there was there were too many parties it was causing too much of a ruckus in the neighborhood.
I mean, can't speak to that because I know that there have been lots of events there successfully and people who've lived in the neighborhood and maybe it's not as many, but it's gone to zero.
So I just want to bring us back to the item in general. And I would just say this. I said this earlier. I've lived here my whole life. I sat through the many Penfield discussions. That is a can of worms that this town, that frankly, I'm not inclined to do. We have a lot of things happening in this town that require not only my attention, but the elected boards as well. And I don't know how we're going to build anything or add an amenity for, or a deck or whatever it is for less than $3 million or about the same price. So I think the item at hand right now is, do we want to fix and this foundation of a perfectly good $7.4 million building, or does this board want to vote to knock down that building to be in violation, to be in compliance with FEMA? This is not about what's going to happen someday down the road, about what possibly could be discussed, probably over another hundreds of hours of meetings about what might happen at Penfield Pavilion.
And what I'm trying to suggest in my commentary is not a comment on the noise levels at Burr, but rather the choice before us is a lose-lose. It's a Sophie's choice.
It is.
And what I would suggest, and many of our speakers and the comments we've received, is that we don't have to make it, that we do have other options. And so I just don't appreciate the characterization is that and I get that's what the resolution is. So in the truest sense, yes, we have to vote yes or no, unless there is a sense of the body, which I'll ask for in a moment, to do something different. But the point is, if we take the time, we perhaps do what one of the speakers suggested. There are alternatives. It's just that given the situation we're in, and we didn't have to be here, so I want to reiterate that, but we are, nevertheless. Given the situation we're here, and the reason we are here is for lots of reasons, and it's not just the malfeasance of a former administration. So I think we need to look at that realistically and say, given that, do we want to rush into a decision? Because I think the decision is going to come down to, it doesn't have to come down to tear it down or do something small. I think we have to weigh other options, understand something so we can make an informed decision. So I guess with that, I would say, before I'm comfortable voting on the amendment, two things. I want to understand, based on the conversation that the CFO and the chair of the Board of Finance had, but before that, I'd love to get a sense of the body, because I won't waste time making a new motion, to look at the pathway that Becky Bunnell had recommended in terms of appropriating the same amount of money, not designating it specifically, with the understanding that we could move the building, take some time, get out of the NOV before March 31st, before we go into retrograde. So I would just love to get a sense of your reaction, the board's reaction of that recommendation.
So I'm, excuse me, I'm trying to understand what that means, because I don't have any documents from any engineers that said that moving the building into the parking lot complies with NOVs. Does it?
Is that
Not by
a
itself.
FEMA? I mean, do we know that from FEMA?
Like simply moving the building to the parking lot?
One of the recommendations, what someone suggested, a caller suggested, who, I don't know what her background is, except for she's involved in various town boards, had suggested, as we did in the past when we were remediating from Sandy, the building was moved to the parking lot and put there so we could clean it up.
This is Tom Bremer. My understanding of that suggestion is to somehow move the building, and that would buy us time. We could remove some of the contaminated fill until a subsequent decision is made. I've got a number of problems with that. Number one, we don't really have any real cost estimate as to what the cost is to move the building and then move the building back. My suspicion is that it's greater than 1.5 million. But having even said that, to me, the bigger issue from an engineering standpoint is we've moved this building once. It's already 15 years old. Every time you move a building, it puts a lot of wear and tear and strain on the building. To do it again, I think, I don't think that would be a very wise decision. But again, you know, I hate to say it, but I am an engineer, and I do know that stuff like that does really put a lot of strain on a building. So I would be hesitant to say that that would be something that we should consider. And certainly we shouldn't consider it unless we've had an engineering team fully assess all the ramifications of that idea, which we have not done.
And I would just add that, I just want to be clear, though, it's not as if we just said to two things to FEMA over this past many months of negotiating with them. We talked about everything. We talked about putting the Penfield Pavilion on a barge and bringing it over to Jennings. We talked about, you know, moving the building into the parking lot, fixing the, you know, the gray beams, and then putting it back. We talked about a lot of things. We talked a tremendous amount of ideas.
Now, I would just like to add,
Yes.
FEMA does not have a problem with the actual building itself. FEMA has a problem with the foundations.
And the
So whether we
elevation.
demo the building or we keep the building, the foundations is what the problems is.
Right, which is why I'm trying to think about
At the
solutions to
elevation.
save the building. Because it's not the building anyone, I think, well, many people have a problem with it, but it's not what I'm having the problem with. It's all these other cost differentials.
So
But-
just to be clear, though, the two items that they, after a lot of back and forth, were, A, the way to comply would not have the building there anymore, because then the foundation wouldn't be in violation because there wouldn't be a building. B, lower the gray beams to the foundation that they require within their national floodplain regulations. And to us, that just seemed like it's really the only two options. Moving it to the parking lot doesn't get us out of the NOV. And then we have a building and a parking lot. So I think really, I just wanted you to understand that it's not as if we just, you know, slapped this together. And that's why it took time. It was a back and forth between FEMA for many, many months. And engineers and people way smarter than me on these subjects were looking into this matter. These are the two, that was the two options, you know, like knock it down, you have no violation, or lower the building. And it made sense to everyone involved in these meetings, and multiple meetings, to go under, clean out the soil, suck it out, reinforce the beams, because those beams run 30 feet into the ground, those gray beams. Just reinforce it, cut it, lower it, and it's everything we're used to for the last how many years since it's been there, and move on.
So I'll just make a final point, and then I'm fine to move on to the financial questions. I guess I would say, acknowledging all of the work that goes into this, and the months and the years and behind the scenes, and I appreciate that. But I guess what I'm also struggling with is you have 3 elected bodies, which also includes me and Mr. Flynn, and we're now being asked to make a decision, and we haven't been privy to much of this until now. And in a representative government, I appreciate that we're elected to do a job, but we're elected to represent our constituency. So we've been scrambling, and I guess this circles back to the head explosion, because we're now scrambling to fill in all the details and to learn all that you've been dealing with for years, when it didn't have to be this hard. And I guess for me, that's kind of the sad part about this, that it didn't have to be this hard, this frustrating. Maybe we would have gotten here and we would have had to make a difficult decision, but we would have been able to do so, not in a matter of days, but in at least a matter of months. I don't think I need, you know, to keep going to reiterate the points. I'm glad to have been able to state things for the record. I do have a sense of where this will go. I do need to state some other things for the record, though, and just get some clarification from Mr. Schmidt, so.
So, and I understand your frustration, because I am frustrated too, and the same constituents that you want to represent, I represent as well. And that matters to me a lot. I wish I didn't, listen, when they told me I had a deadline, I thought I had a few more months for us to flush all this out. You're obviously not going to bring volunteer boards in at 9 o'clock in the morning, or you know, everyone works. You work, elected officials work. It is our job as the administration to flush this stuff out, to get all the data, to bring everything together, to make sure we have good information, then to present to the town bodies for consideration. This deadline was not something we were expecting. We weren't told this. And if we had been, it would have been very helpful, because we could have shared that with everyone, and then we could have set up a timeline to meet it. We didn't have, that didn't happen. And to no fault of you or any elected official or me. But we are here at this time. So I want to open it up to Tom, and then we'll follow up with the resolution questions.
I have a time limit, so I need Nancy to ask her questions and get those answered so that we can move this along, please.
So you wanted to talk about finance?
Yeah, I'd like Mr. Schmidt to characterize the conversation. I'm not sure how this new resolution impacts this, but I think it's the same.
And also bond counsel too as well?
And bond counsel. I do think, but it's really more a question of the mechanism given. Jared, would you like to characterize the question in the conversation? Because I had said, as I said in the email, I was going to turn to you to ask you to kind of summarize what the chairman's concerns were, chairwoman's concerns were.
Can you hear me? Can you hear it?
And I understand it. I just think it would be best coming from you, and I can follow up with questions.
1 second.
We can hear you.
Tom, you say you can hear me?
Yes.
All right.
I can hear you too. I don't know if I can hear you inside the building though.
So,
I don't think it's coming through the mic.
okay. How about now?
It's
No?
hard to tell.
Yes?
Jared, can you just come up here, please?
Yep.
I have a seat.
Are they really loaded? I'd say yes.
All right. I don't know exactly what the question is, but I will say I think it revolves around the authorization to spend money out of the transfer account where there were 2 transfers. What I would say, which is very important, and which is the reason why, one of the reasons that we offered this amendment, is because this clarifies and negates that issue, and there shouldn't need to be that argument, because this is an appropriation from that account that would need to go to all 3 boards. So if there was any question about whether or not, who's authorized to spend the money, this sort of overrules that, and that was purposeful. We knew that there were some questions around authorization, so rather than competing with that and potentially butting heads, this was a better way to go.
Okay, so I appreciate that, but I'm just going to go a little bit deeper, and this I'll leave to the Board of Finance and the RTM to deal with this as it comes to them. The question was around, there were surplus transfers up through 2021. It was about 9 million, about 3 million of that was spent. It was the same language, exact same language as appropriations of 8.4 million, which there was no question. It was a transfer in 2022, and there was zero question that, that money was set aside, and it was not an approval of spending, it was just an approval to set aside the money. It's exact same language as the transfer from 2021, which monies have been spent from that. So I just think it leads the question, and again, it's a financial mechanism, but to me, it also leads the question of, I'm not going to say the legitimacy because I don't know if that's the case, but it is certainly something to question. And then what comes to bear then is what exactly has been appropriated appropriately versus this sort of 8.4, because then it brings to question the 6.8. I know this is a really in the weeds thing. I'm saying it for the record because it's something that the Board of Finance should look at because the language is exactly the same, and yet the result, you're kind of codifying it by this process as you're saying, but it means that I think we have to look back at how some of the fill expenses were spent. And to the gentleman's question, I just want to reiterate the point that there still are, for the record, as Mr. Bremer had estimated, about anywhere from 12 to 17, which doesn't include which doesn't include the WPCA expenses that remain for remediation. So,
Nancy, if I might, my understanding from when I was on the Board of Finance in Lake is the Board of Finance can make these types of transfers. You're absolutely right on appropriations. Using the word appropriations changes it. But in addition, the other thing that I believe we did when I was on the Board of Finance is we made, when we thought that things might be controversial or we wanted to make sure our colleagues on the RTM were not underrepresented, we made the item contingent upon approval by the RTM as well. So there are mechanisms and ways to address the concern. And in this instance, I will say, though I was only told about it today, that's exactly what the administration is doing, is making sure that the RTM has their bite at the apple.
as I said, I was brought into a conversation between the chairman of the Board of Finance, chairwoman of the Board of Finance, and the CFO. So as I had said to Mr. Schmidt, I'd be bringing it up today. I appreciate that it's trying to be rectified by this, but because I didn't look at it, I don't know how it's impacted or how it addresses that, because as I said, it's not going to change.
At their table.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to change the way I vote today. I would also just like to state for the record that I'm concerned that all of these whereas clauses, again, it's not going to change my vote. I'm not going to take the time and make a motion to, it's not going to change it. I will say for the record, some of this language is bordering on offending me, because it's so conflating some of the issues. It's instilling kind of a sense of doom and gloom about a myriad of negative consequences. I just think that this language is a little bit unnecessarily aggressive, in the sense of it's conflating fill and other remediation and construction, and I just don't think it's stating the facts. I'm just saying, this is my opinion. Let me sort of finish that. I know you have to go. I'm not going to make motions because, as I said, it's not going to change my ultimate vote, and it's too bad, because I think with time, we could have come to a different place.
And Nancy, thank you for that, and thank you to be cognizant of my time in that. The only thing I will say to that is that I don't see it conflating the two issues, because quite frankly, the $11 million or what have you that we're voting on right now really goes to the two issues. There's a significant portion of it that is related to the fill pile, unfortunately, and then there's a significant portion that's related to the FEMA. And it goes back to something that Ms. Nesma said during her remarks, which is really that they're two separate scandals, quite frankly. There was the scandal of the fill pile, and then there's a separate scandal of the management of the issues with the building of Penfield Pavilion, or should I say the rebuilding of Penfield Pavilion. And I might remind people that in that era, there was a lot of stuff done without the the boards knowing about it. We at the Board of Finance came upon the whole appeal process quite by accident during a quarterly review. We had no heads up that there was an appeal process even needed, or that the $4.3 million from FEMA was even in question until we asked about it. And then we were told, not just the first time, but we had to ask about it a second time to hear about the second incident. And actually, I was quite hopeful for the future, given some of the comments of people who were on the RTM during the Phil Pyle debacle, because when I tried to talk about it in an RTM meeting, I was basically shut down and told that it wasn't a concern and that it was Board of Finance overreaching. So the fact that people have changed their tunes now a few years later and are starting to look at things, I think is quite hopeful for the future.
I have one final question, if I may. If what Mr. Camaro, and I haven't read it, so I can't comment to it, but if what he's saying is true with any, do we have any legal recourse in terms of going after FEMA's position if in fact they're not true in their estimation from an engineering perspective or a flood perspective, that it's better to, before we go about lowering the grade beam, if it in fact is true, is there any other recourse other than this letter, these appeals that were then subsequently denied?
I mean, I don't know if Attorney Baldwin's still on, but my understanding is we have exhausted all avenues and continue to try to recoup some of the funding, recoup costs associated with this whole thing, including any penalties that would be imposed by the criminal trial. My understanding from FEMA is this is it. Like, this is it. No more.
I guess
Two appeals, you've lost both. They were lengthy appeals, fighting everything, and listen, I like Mr. Camaro, he's a nice man, and I understand the frustration. But at the same time, I've read those appeals. They're thick, they're long, they're citing everything under the sun, and they said no. No.
I just would say for the record, FEMA isn't going to say, yes, you can go ahead and sue us. So I would just.
Well, I don't know how successful a suit against a federal agency is going to be. I mean, even the congressional delegation has said to me, we are not fighting their regulations. We will help and ask for an extension for you to get this done, and we expect you to try to get it done in the timeline. And then if you do, we will stand with you to fight for you not to get the downgrade because you have took steps to comply. But no one ever said we can get rid of, we can fight the regulations, go for it, we're standing with you. They have said the very opposite. No, we cannot fight their regulations.
I'd be interested to hear what an environmental attorney would weigh in, how they would feel. And again, just something to think about. I don't have any further questions.
Okay, thank you. Tom?
I'm all set. I'm ready to vote.
So I just want to ask bond counsel, if you don't mind, if you wouldn't mind, just for our public edification and for the boards.
And you're here and you're in such a nice suit.
I know, and you didn't get to talk at all.
Well, thank you for that, all the compliments.
So I just want to confirm with you that this is in compliance with our charter, with our rules, with our regs. This is good, the way it's written, as far as the authority, giving authority that allows the Board of Finance to then have their authority, and then if they so choose to pass, then the RTM can have authority. That's all I'm trying to make sure of.
Yes, just to reiterate what Mr. Schmidt said, when we looked back at the previous actions that were taken to create the surplus, at least, and I will tell you that the minutes of the Board of Selectmen meeting and the Board of Finance were pretty thin on this. But it appeared that what both of those boards did is to create this account to deal with remediation issues related to Penfield.
Right.
When we looked at the resolution on the $8+ million, okay, that resolution was clear that the RTM was passing that money, but that there was going to come back, we would come back to the RTM if there was a need to use any of that money for construction. So in order to sort out, since there were two pieces of this, which is the fill pile remediation and the construction, we advised the administration that it was best to take the entire thing back through the process so that people are clear that this account that has been duly created out of two previous surpluses is being spent in this way. And I've heard a lot of talk about transparency tonight, and I think this is honestly also the most transparent way to deal with the funding for the project.
And,
Sure, right, go ahead.
and it's really more of a statement than a question, and I appreciate that you're referring to the minutes. I think there's more nuance listening to the meeting, and this is really more for the boards that follow, for the Board of Finance to re-listen to their meeting and to the RTM to discover intent, because the language is the same from the 2021 appropriation versus the 2022. And I appreciate that it's fixing it, and it's a little outside of my understanding of how it impacts the spending ability, but as I said, in the purview of the Board of Finance and then the RTM,
Yeah, and I think that will probably, I mean, honestly, my conversations with Mr. Schmidt, once we review, he asked us to review all the minutes, which is what took some time last week. And once we reviewed all the minutes, Mr. Schmidt's recollection is the minutes sort of say one thing, but I think there may be a different understanding of the Board of Finance that we were going to come back to actually discuss the appropriation. And that was definitely clear at the RTM money on the meeting minutes from the spending of the second surplus. So our advice to the first select woman was that the best way to approach this was to run this resolution back through all the boards. And obviously, there was some discussion of funding the $3 million at first through bonding, because that would have funded the construction piece of this. And to the point Mr. Flynn, as the former chair of the Board of Finance, made at the upside, it makes a lot more sense if you've got the money on hand to spend the money than to go out and pay interest to borrow the money.
Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate that, because I know it got confusing for our public that we had put it on for $3 million, because I was trying to comply with what I believed the fill pile was fund for, and then the construction, and we were under the gun for the 4 o'clock deadline on Friday. But I appreciate you clarifying that.
Okay.
You feel this is good?
I think it's great.
All right, thank you.
From a legal perspective.
Okay. All right, I just want to follow the rules. Just trying to follow the rules.
I have literally one more comment.
Okay, go ahead.
And I wasn't going to say anything, but now I have to. Because I was called out in a letter to an editor for behaving politically at the town hall. A town hall I wasn't even at, and it's not by you.
I didn't see
And
any
no,
letters.
no. And I say this as a cautionary tale because it does not benefit our residents if we start, and I don't think that's been on display at this meeting. I don't think it benefits the residents if we start getting into like a political jockeying on this, because I don't believe that this is a political issue. I think people are really trying to do the best that they can to get to the most informed answer that they can. And I hope by my questioning today, even if you're not in agreement with my position, and I don't mean present company, I mean the boards that follow, that you really take into consideration the things that we've talked about, the questions I've asked, and that those are considered, because this shouldn't be made emotionally, this decision. It shouldn't be made for political gain or calculation or calculus. As I said, this is a decision that's going to impact the community for decades, and it's something that I take very seriously. I hope that's been in evidence today, and I was really offended by the suggestion that I was acting politically, again, at a meeting I wasn't even at. And I think that I won't speak to every elected official, but my hope is that every elected official is acting in the best interest of their constituency and not for some other purpose, so.
No, and I agree with you, and I'm sorry, I don't know what letter you're referring to. But listen, I would venture to say, and I've asked repeatedly since I took office, for all of us to tone it down, elected officials especially, and it happens on both sides. And Nancy, I get attacked probably way more than you ever would on things that have nothing to do with anything, and they are purely 100% political. So I have repeatedly asked our community to come together as elected officials and look at the items and look at them holistically and professionally, and keep the politics out of it. But as you saw tonight, there's a little mudslinging that goes around. And so the bottom line is we have we have a political environment, and sometimes it gets a little out of control. And I apologize for someone, I don't know who wrote the letter, and I can't.
The who of it doesn't matter.
And I can't take responsibility for other people's letters, just like you can't take responsibility for some people saying some things that, that are said about others, including myself. So I think the message from this board should be, everyone should just knock it off, frankly, and start treating each other with respect and civility, and all that we do as elected officials on behalf of the residents of this town. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, Town?
Call the vote, please.
Yes, sir. All right, so all right, I just want to be clear that I'm doing this right, too, Attorney Stalstrom.
We have the amendments. We have to vote
So
on the amendment.
we made a motion on the main motion. We seconded that motion. Then we amended the motion
Right. I
with
think
this
that-
resolution,
right, but I
and
think
we
the-
seconded
yes, I
it, and
think
we
the prop-
opened it up.
I think the proper nature of the amendment was that the amendment was to substitute what you had before you
strike
for the
all.
original. Correct.
Okay, so we had the motion, and then we had the second, then we had an amendment to strike all with this resolution.
I
Is
don't know
everyone?
that we officially struck the original one, or are you saying that the motion sort of?
I think the motion on
The
this,
intent of it.
the motion, right, what I heard, the motion, the intent that I heard is what the amendment you had before you would replace the original
Can I just-
resolution.
I make the motion that the amendment that was read into the record earlier replace the original motion that was on the agenda.
I'll second it.
Correct. Okay.
All right, so if there is is there any further discussion from the board on the item? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And to be clear, I'm voting to strike so that we're voting on this.
To strike all.
So yes,
of
I'm
it.
in agreement that, yes, I'm in agreement that this now is the motion we're voting on.
Correct.
And now we vote, okay.
Okay, so this is now replacing the item. It's got a motion and a second. All in favor of the strike all amendment?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Motion carries 2-1. All right,
Thank you, everybody.
wait a minute. No, we voted as amended. The second vote was as amended.
It was as amended.
Strike all.
So to be clear,
passed
for the
now, right?
record, I voted to support the amendment to think, but I voted against it in the end.
All right, and I just want to have a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries
Bye.
unanimously.
Bye, Tom.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. Oh, okay.